Okay, it appears like we're live. Um, I wanted to speak tonight. First of all, sorry I'm late. We're getting close to my wedding, and there's a lot to plan, and obviously, like that's a lot to deal with. So sometimes things come up, but um, uh, I wanted to speak today about intellectual credibility. And what is intellectual credibility? Who is intellectually credible? What is an intellectual? And kind of just process this idea a little bit because it's become kind of just a very common thing for people to say, well, I'm an intellectual. Well, for intellectuals. And I said before, what is an intellectual? I guess an intellectual is somebody who, like, uh, you know, I don't know. They're I if an intellectual is anything, it's somebody who's I said before that their participatory their competitive space is one of intellectual pursuits, but I don't even think that that's a good answer because it shouldn't be about competition to begin with. And so I really don't know what an intellectual is anymore. And I don't think I ever really did know. I don't think anybody really knows. It's just if it you know what it the most accurate answer for what is an intellectual is someone who wants to be considered smart by others. And that is like a poor definition, but it's I think the most truthful definition that exists. Like the people that I know that call themselves intellectuals, that's what they want to be. They want to be considered smart, and it's like, oh well, I'm a thinker. It's like, okay, well, who isn't? Who isn't? That's the thing. Is like who, and I mean that completely. You think that people whose physical pursuits are not thinkers. It's like you have to think about your environment in order to physically act in it. And so I don't really know what an intellectual is. I mean, I guess maybe it's someone whose work is that of mostly thinking. But the thing is that even then, I think that that's not a truly complete definition. It's almost like that's become what we call an intellectual because we're not expecting results from intellectuals. It's like it's almost like it's a free pass to just think about anything, whatever you want. String theory? You want to think about equations that are abstract that never end up panning out to working, on any engineering of any kind? Like, go for it. We're going to pay you taxpayer money. And that's not even a useful form of being an intellectual. It's interesting because constructor theory, as I spoke about yesterday, and I know the stream cut out yesterday. It cut out at a decent point, so I didn't pick up the stream again because I went and I looked where it had cut out, and it kind of like made sense. But they really should tell you, like, with a beep or something like that if it cuts out. But um, that constructor theory is focused on tasks, and so you're focused on accomplishing a task, and then it's about, like, how do we do that, and is it possible, really? That is actually the way to think. It's not just like this random soup of ideas that you just sit there and, like, participate in, I guess, and just entertain in your mind for the sake of your own entertainment and others. I say that here as I, like, philosophize in front of a camera. But the thing is that I do feel like every night, unless it's just like, oh, random working session, there is a goal there's a goal. And I should have put, I went back and forth on the title for this. I typed out, what is intellectual credibility? Who is an intellectual? What, who has intellectual credibility? As questions. And I should have probably picked a question and left it instead of just a term, intellectual credibility, because at least then there's a goal. But I mean, it is in the description, but still, it's not just random thoughts. And I think that this is important for us to realize, is that, like, I don't really think that there is a definition of an intellectual. I think it's a nonsense word. I think we're going to add it to the list of nonsense words. I think that there is something that I would call intellectual credibility, but it's not something that any particular person gets. It's not something that, it's not like no one is an intellectual. It's that a manner of thinking is intellectually credible, and then there's manners of the appearance of thinking that's not thinking, that is not intellectually credible. And I was thinking about this a lot because I was looking at an interview that Joe Rogan did with Neil deGrasse Tyson. And he's speaking to Neil deGrasse Tyson and about the UFOs. Neil deGrasse Tyson is like, Joe Rogan says, and I would play it, but I don't know what's going to happen if I do. It could get cut or something like that. But Joe Rogan is basically like, the military has tracked craft, going from 80,000 feet down to 50 feet and, less than a second. And Neil deGrasse Tyson stops him and is like, that's not actually true. What it is that the right way to say it is that we have sensors that have detected, you could call, them craft that, went from 80,000 feet to 50 feet in less than a second. But and then he was like, this is much more accurate way to frame it, because you're saying that it's not a definitive statement. It's that this is how we've done this, and we've detected it via these detectors, essentially. And that's not wrong. He's right about that. But then he's like, well, then the next question is, are they accurate? Has anybody checked them out? All these other questions. And like, anybody who's really looked into this issue knows that this has been like kind of a recurring thing across multiple detectors, and has also been seen by human eyes and like across decades of span. And the government kind of screwed themselves on this, because they were the ones that dismissed everybody who talked about this as crazy. But what I noticed is that Neil deGrasse Tyson had started with a legitimate statement, and then the goal for him became, let's try to dismiss this idea in its entirety almost. And he was like, he did say, he was like, I want people to pursue this if it's true. He's like, it's going to require extraordinary claims. I'm not really convinced, blah, blah, blah. And I get it. Like, but he's like, I'm not putting in the effort into this. And at least you're honest about it, but what I noticed is that it was like there was this weird irrational desire to not approach the idea honestly, even though it had started as an attempt to approach the idea with honesty. And that is something that I discussed yesterday about all these theories of like, they seem to all admit the requirement of a user in constructor theory, or a conscious chooser in emergence theory, or basically a consciousness in physics. But that there is this irrational desire to not anthropomorphize anything, and it's pretty overt. And it is irrational. Like, it's become irrational. There is also this in this, you know, UFO, I guess, um, field in a way, and it's not enough to just like do it um, out of I don't know, like a desire to save your career. Like, you know, once I saw Eric Weinstein go on Logan Paul's podcast, and he's asked about aliens and if he knows about Bob Lazar, and you know, obviously Eric Weinstein knows about Bob Lazar. I mean, he went on Joe Rogan's show, and you know, Joe Rogan is interested in this topic quite a bit, and he knows Eric, and like Eric once was on Brian Keating's podcast, and he was asked, you know, are there extraterrestrial beings flying around? Do you think? This was like a long time ago, that we're just not aware of, and it was the first time he was on the show, I think. And Eric's paused for a bit, and then he was like, well, I think there are terrestrial beings, you know, flying around that we're not aware of. And he's basically, he was saying, he was talking about like capable of interstellar travel. He wasn't talking about, you know, stealth aircraft or something like that. He was talking about interstellar travel. And he basically said that yes, but he said that they were terrestrial. I don't know what he means by that. Maybe, I don't know. Like, maybe they're the descendants of a previous civilization here on Earth. That's kind of what I have always personally assumed exists anyways. Whether that is what, you know, these craft are that we're seeing, whether that makes up a portion of the craft that we see, I don't know. But I certainly think that it is a portion, probably, at least. But I don't know what Eric Weinstein meant by that. But what he meant was clearly that there's beings capable of interstellar travel, because that's what he said. And if you say that, then you do believe that that's there. But when he was on Logan Paul's podcast, branded as the smartest man in the world, he didn't want to admit that he knew anything about Bob Lazar. He tried to change the subject, and literally, like, you can see his face when they bring it up. He's like, oh shit, like, I don't really want to talk about this, because there is like this intellectual credibility that he was afraid of losing, essentially. That's the government's fault, more than anything, to be honest. But it's not like Neil deGrasse Tyson has to worry about that at this point, because the government has admitted that there's like craft flying around. And at this point, you gotta be like, okay, let's at least entertain the idea with some seriousness, and not worry about losing credibility, because the government has acknowledged this. And I'm not saying the government tells the truth. I don't even think that they're telling the truth in their statements of, we don't know where these things, you know, what these things are. Of course, they know exactly what they are, I think. But I think they're lying to us about what they know. But still, they've acknowledged the existence of these things. And even if they don't exist and this is all fake, if you took the government at its word for it, that at this point, then I don't think that it would destroy your intellectual credibility at all. I think that it actually kind of hurts it to not at all take this as anything true. And didn't that one group flip out and when you mentioned God and ban you? Yes, they did. They did ban me when I mentioned God. It was funny because like my theory is called Sentient Singularity Theory, and like I went on and on and on about how, like, you know, they you know, that existence was a sentient being, and that, you know, the universe was a sentient being, and that hadrons are sentient beings, and atoms and molecules and cells and, or, you know, obviously organisms, nobody's debating that. And then you know, technological singularities, and even families and castes. And they basically didn't, I mean, they were debating me on this. They were like, nobody thinks, you know, a hadron's a sentient being. And I was like, well, I think a hadron's a sentient being, so you can't say nobody does. And And, Stephen Wolfram said that it appears like molecules may be, not that different from cells and organisms. And because they're not. And, after a while, this guy just like stops me and he's like, Tyler. And he hasn't said anything. The whole like debate, I don't even know who this guy was. He was like sitting there quietly. He was clearly older than than a lot of the other people engaging with me. And I was like, yes. And he was like, do you believe in God? I was like, well, I pretty much sat here and argued that existence is a sentient being, so I guess, sure. And he was like, now this is dangerous. This is why this needs to be banned. And like, it just spiraled. And I was like, how is it then, like, why is this coming up, an hour into the conversation? You're asking me, do I believe in God? You haven't been thinking much. I mean, it's like his subconscious was like aware of what I was saying, but like his conscious mind would not acknowledge what was happening. It's like, it is weird. It's very weird. But I don't think that they have any control over it at this point. I mean, maybe they do, but it's a process, though. It's some kind of like, they have to want to be honest about the issue and be willing to detach themselves from whatever the result of the exploration would be. This is like, kind of like people talk about like, I don't know, manifestation or something like that. It's like, that doesn't really happen until you've almost detached yourself from the results. And that's true of everything. And it's not just, whether or not you consciously want, to manifest something, or, it's just kind of like unconscious. It's like I didn't even meet. It's funny because I had moved out here to the city, and I didn't want to date anyone, and then ended up, everybody slowly over the course of about 2 years ended up getting into very serious relationships. As I got older, started getting married, and you're not surrounded by prospects of the opposite sex usually after college like you are in college. And so I ended up like getting some FOMO, I guess, and wanting to, be in a relationship because everybody else I knew was in one, and it was just like, I had FOMO. And so I remember like trying to meet people and didn't go anywhere. And then eventually I was like, you know what? Whatever. It'll happen when it happens, and I need to detach myself from the results. And I wasn't like consciously thinking that. I wasn't like, I need to detach myself from the results. I was like, I'm just going to focus on my work and just let anything happen that happens. And it was like an honest difference in shift. It wasn't like I just said it. It was like I had really just come to terms with like, things will happen when they happen, and I'm not really worried about it anymore. And I'm just going to use the time that I have to focus on my work. And as soon as I did that, I met somebody. And that is not a coincidence at all. Like, it is kind of how it works. That's true of thinking, too. I was an anti-theist my entire life. And it was because in my mind, I don't think I could have been honestly intellectually or entertained with any kind of credibility the idea that God's existence prior to kind of thinking about the simulation hypothesis, because in any other context in which I had pictured it, it was invalidating of everything else that I thought that I knew. Whereas then when you picture it within the simulation hypothesis, it did not clash with my perceived worldview so much. It kind of just added to it. And that meant that I was able to detach myself from whatever the results of that would have been. And I was able to give it honest thought. And then after that, I, had a theophany essentially. So, that was not possible, though, if I didn't frame it or if the idea wasn't framed for me in a way that didn't clash with everything that I knew. And I think that this is what's happening with the UFO topic for people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's literally, we call, his title is an astrophysicist. It's like, okay, Mr. Astrophysicist, you have missed this entirely. Like, you have dismissed the like taking the idea seriously that there are beings from potentially other worlds on our planet, like, or in our planet, use a more accurate way of saying it, but still it sounds weird, but it's more accurate. And you dismiss this idea like forever. You see no evidence of this. It's like, who's paying you off to keep quiet, or are you really that inept? And that is really like what it seems to come down to. And I think that that is a very difficult thing for people like that to face, is like, if there are beings around, and like Neil deGrasse Tyson said, he was like, in order to do this, you have to basically realize that, or admit that they do not want to be seen, and that they're capable of being very, very stealthy. And I do think that that's true, but still, like, you dismissed even that as a possibility that worth taking seriously until now. That does kind of appear to threaten your intellectual credibility a little bit. At least, like, that's the appearance. I'm not saying that it does, but it's the appearance of it. So I think that that's why there is this weird, irrational, like, desire to dismiss this. And same thing with even people like Elon Musk. I mean, it's like, I don't know if Musk is paid off, or he's not paid off, but I don't know, briefed and told, something that we've deemed classified. If you reveal it, you're going to jail, or we won't, use SpaceX anymore for any of our launches. I don't know. I think NASA's lying. Like, the Kepler, it's funny, like the Kepler Space Telescope. It was this guy on Twitter. I know nothing about him. Other people pointed to him. I wasn't like a big follower of the guy. But he had made some pretty outstanding claims that he worked at this classified site, and it was it did appear, from what others had told me who were more involved with this, that his profile was constructed in a way that was encrypted to some degree where he could not be located, and he went by undisclosed disclosure or something like that, and he had basically made all kinds of claims that there are a bunch of different alien races and that are here, and that also there are like paranormal things that are real that the government is aware of, including the most outstanding claim I think that he made, that our government has a Wendigo or skinwalker in captivity, essentially, like captive. And I don't know, as somebody who has like had an experience with that, with the that phenomenon, and there's a video about it in my feed if you want to check it out. But I'm not going to dismiss that completely, but I also, that sounds pretty outrageous, I will absolutely admit. And I don't know how possible that is even, but maybe. Even if they're real, it's like, I don't know how possible it is for you to keep one in a cage. But even that, like, that's like saying, that is not just like saying, it is saying essentially like we have a demon in jail. Like, I don't know how possible that is, but maybe it is. I don't know. But what gave him some kind of credibility was he had said Kepler Space Telescope will be, announced in a few days as going offline, but reality was it saw something that it wasn't supposed to see. And then 3 days later, NASA was like, Kepler Space Telescope has, is no longer responding to, any of our communication requests, and has gone dark. And, sorry guys, there goes our multi-billion-dollar telescope, which was the Kepler Space Telescope. Was a huge telescope that they had built and put into space, very expensive, and it was looking for, planets that are in other star systems, and they were basically using it to find other potentially habitable planets. But I think it was just like looking at planets in general, and it had already mapped thousands of them, and it was like the biggest telescope since Hubble. And so then they kind of just like lost contact with it and was like, okay, sorry guys, that's it. Like Hubble had a problem once, and they did a crazy mission where they sent the space shuttle further out into space than ever than any of its other missions. I think this was the furthest the orbiter had ever gone from Earth, and they had to replace the mirror in it, I think is what they did. And because basically they launched Hubble up there, and then they tried taking some photos with it, and everything was out of focus because they had made a mistake in basically the prescription, the head of the lens that was on Hubble, and they had to replace it. And the only way to do it was by sending the space shuttle out there to do it, and they did it. I'm not saying they could do that with Kepler. Kepler might be quite a bit further. I don't know, but I never heard any kind of talk of like trying to get Kepler back online. It was just like, sorry guys, that's it. And it gave that guy like an enormous amount of credibility. It was the reason why I had heard about him. And this is what I mean, though, is like what gives intellectual credibility is your ability to make predictions. We've kind of just pinned it on, well, did you get a PhD? Sure. How many predictions have you been able to make that have panned out to be true? Probably not that many if you are involved in physics. So, math is kind of different, but still, like physics, probably not that many. And that isn't intellectual credibility then. Like, it's not. So, but this guy who was an anonymous profile, I had made outrageous claims, I will say. Even as somebody who believes that there is demons, like that you could call Wendigos, and believes I saw one, like, could have just been a hallucination in sleep paralysis, and that it's just random firing of neurons or whatever that resulted in that. I don't believe that because I don't believe in randomness. It seems to be mathematically impossible. But it still seems outrageous to think of keeping one in a cage. But the guy predicted that, and I looked at the dates. Like, I looked at the date that he said that, and then I looked at the date that, they had announced that Kepler went offline. And it was just like a few days later, and he had called it. And it's like, if that's true, if he's right, then NASA is very much lying to us about things. And I do think that that's true. Obviously, NASA's lying to us about things. I was listening more to Richard Dolan. He was saying that, that, what's this guy's name? The astronaut, not John Glenn, but the other guy who walked on the moon. I don't think John Glenn walked on the moon, but there was another astronaut that walked on the moon. Buzz Aldrin. It was Buzz Aldrin. And he was like talking about Buzz Aldrin's claims about UFOs and how he had made claims about it, and then like a few days later always had to walk things back. And the guy who made the movie The Phenomenon went on Logan Paul's podcast and was talking about it. And he had said that he had actually gotten an interview with Buzz Aldrin once, and then Buzz Aldrin called him and was like, sorry, I can't do it. Actually, like, you know, basically he had been told by the government, you can't speak about this. And so he backed out of the interview. And this is also something that what's his name? Harry Reid has done multiple times. He's been like, I was told that Lockheed Martin had craft that were recovered, and then he walked that back. It's like, how do you make that statement and walk it back? You can't make that statement and walk it back. But Lockheed Martin has craft, like, I think, at least. And it's like, what other who else would have them? Think about that. I'm not saying no one else does. I'm just saying, if anyone does, wouldn't you think that it is the leading aerospace company who has run, whose Skunk Works department has basically been everything that has been acknowledged about Area 51 and classified aerospace technology? Probably it's Lockheed Martin. They make the best planes in the world. It's probably them that has that has the stuff. It's probably more than just them, but it's definitely also them. If anybody does have it, they would be one of them. And it just makes a lot of sense. But there is this, like I said, though, there is this, like, I don't know, weird thing that's happens when an institution isn't willing to acknowledge taking an idea seriously or is openly hostile to that idea. And I think that this is what's happened via our education institutions, unconsciously, by us at least, when it comes to theology. We basically taught there's either evolution and science, or there's God, and you can't really believe in both, which is false. Like, it's so incredible. Like, that was what I believed. I remember my rabbi asked me before my bar mitzvah, he was like, Tyler, what are your thoughts about God? And I was like, I don't believe in God. He was like, well, why not? And I was like, because Bible says that the world was created in 6 days, and I know that, dinosaurs were on Earth for millions of years, and so that's impossible. And the rabbi had said to me, well, what if God's days are, different than our days? And I was like, that's stupid. You got to take people at their word to some degree. And all I had ever heard was, Bible says that God created the world in 6 days. The reality is the Hebrew says God creates the world in 6 periods. And now it lines up with Bott periodicity, it seems, I think, and also with my model of the stages of sentience. Is each stage is a period, a yom, which is the Hebrew word used in the Torah for day. And but it's not. The reality is, my rabbi didn't have a sufficient answer for that, response. And so it didn't matter. And you can't just say, well, what if his days are different? It's like, well, then tell me how. If you're not able to tell me how in a way that makes sense with what I believe, why should I believe you? And I understand that, and not if it's, I know people get into all kinds of things about, what is the dinosaur and did they exist? And it's like, that's not even the point. The point is that humans did not appear to be always have been around as modern humans on Earth, and there was other life. So, like, that I do believe, but you're stuck in space-time when you're thinking about this. God's actions are outside of space-time. They're also, they have repercussions within space-time, but they are outside of space-time. And so they aren't, you can't say God, what if God's day is, 1 billion Earth days? Because that's still stuck in space-time. It doesn't work. Stages of sentience is really what it is, and it's just the periods of growth. That's what it is. And that are objective. But unless somebody tells you that, you can't frame it in a way that is convincing. You just kind of have to actually accept something on faith instead of having it fit into a worldview. But I asked Paulina, when we first started dating, I was like, well, do you believe in evolution, or do you believe in that that God created, universe and life? And she was like, well, I believe in both. And I was like, huh. Actually, they don't seem to actually be mutually exclusive ideas now that I'm trying to think about it honestly. It's like only a girl could get me to reconsider like that. But the reason why I couldn't take it seriously is because taking it seriously meant not taking seriously everything else that I had previously taken seriously. And that also, was able to allow me to frame my world in a way that was maneuverable. It wasn't just that it's not like it was, a priority of, it's not like these beliefs are just priorities of value. They are, in a way they are, but they're not, that's not what I mean. I mean, they are ways in which they're just fundamental building blocks of how you understand and relate to your existence and the existence of other things around you. And so I understand why, if you're an astrophysicist, it's really, really hard now to take UFOs seriously. I mean, Sam Harris said it. He was like, for everybody who's ever been trying to be a skeptic on things like this, and he was including himself. And I will say, there was so much honesty in what he was saying. I was actually really impressed. And Sam Harris annoys me a lot sometimes, just being honest. But because he's like, the reason why is not because he's so incredibly wrong. It's that he's so close, yet also to be that close to the truth and also still be so dismissive means an enormous amount of mental gymnastics that just blow my mind a little bit sometimes. But he admitted, he was like, this revelation by the government is profound because anybody who's ever been a skeptic of people who have made claims about this topic and things like that, and he was including himself, now he's like, we're gonna have a really hard time. He was basically saying the Michael Shermers of the world are about to be looking ridiculous. They are about to be the conspiracy theorists. They are. They're not the authorities anymore. Michael Shermer type of people, and he brands himself as a skeptic, so I'm using him as the example more than anybody, because he defines himself as a skeptic. It's not like I try and think about things honestly. It's I'm the skeptic. He thinks that means to be honest, but it doesn't necessarily. You can't actually be a skeptic. This is why skepticism is the wrong mentality, is because to be a skeptic means to dismiss everything, essentially. To be skeptical of everything. You can't be a skeptic in some things and not of others. It's is he a skeptic that the Earth is a sphere? I'm not saying that it is or isn't. I think space is an emergent structure, so your position is determining the shape that you see. But still, regardless, if he believes that the Earth is a sphere, which I believe he does, you can't call yourself a skeptic if you're a skeptic of the flat Earth mentality or position, but not a skeptic of the default, because to truly be thinking is to like challenge the default, your default state. If your default state is, you know, anti-theism, to truly, you know, think about it means rejecting that and honestly looking for evidence that, you know, of God. You know, if you don't believe that aliens exist, then to truly be thinking about the idea, you have to assume they do exist, honestly, and honestly look for evidence that they do exist. If you don't believe that they exist, or if you do believe that they exist, then you have to assume they don't and look for evidence that they don't. And I've waffled back and forth on that kind of issue for a long time, and I've never really been... I've always had an issue with it because I've always believed Bob Lazar, but because there's just too many things about that story to just dismiss it as nonsense. But then at the same time, I always believed when I was younger, there's so many worlds out there, like it'd be an awful waste of space, and you know, we're not special, and like there's no reason why life exists, you know, only here and not anywhere else. If there's that many stars and then planets, and you know, the odds are that of course there's other beings. And then you start really thinking about it, you don't really see any evidence of it. The Fermi paradox comes into play. You're like, start thinking you're an intellectual, and you're like, oh well, you know, the Fermi paradox actually, like, there's no evidence anywhere of these beings, and that's not true either. It seems like it's probably been concealed, but and it's purposely being concealed by them, and it's been concealed by the government. But also, you're also assuming that they are communicating via radio waves, which is odd, makes no sense. It makes sense because that's how we communicate, but it's like, that doesn't work over large distances. You can barely have a real-time conversation with somebody on the moon with radio waves. You ever listen to like the recordings of when they're talking to the people who were on the moon? And it's like, you know, how's it going up there? And then it's just like, well, it's going fine up here. And you're like, is he slow? Why did we send somebody who takes so long to answer such a simple question to the moon? It's because it takes time for the signal to get there and come back. And that's just to the moon. And you can't even have like a real-time communication. It ends up giving you the vibe of like, he's not really paying attention to us, or he's kind of losing his mind and not reacting quickly. And, you know, but that's not true at all. But you can't do it, you know, if you go further than that, really. Like, you can send emails to people on Mars, but you can't, you know, FaceTime with somebody on Earth. So why would you think that like communication is being had on that in that way? It's probably any kind of communication. The next step in communication does appear to be utilizing entanglement. I mean, it's just the next logical step beyond radio waves. It seems to me to be. So you entangle particles, and you basically can you can change the state of particles over here that are entangled with particles over here, and then use it to, you know, generate messages. And there's people that say that you can't because of various reasons, but I don't think that's true. I think you can do it. But that's how you would communicate. This is why Eric Weinstein is wrong about like interstellar travel being our salvation at this point. It's not. Human beings are destroying themselves, not necessarily just by weapons of war and, you know, biological and chemical and nuclear weapons. We're not having children, because the more technologically advanced we get, the less children we have. And our social media environment is absolutely horrendous. It is counterproductive to any kind of sense making. Counterproductive. Not productive, counterproductive. And I do think that that's largely because of gender dynamics or unregulated gender dynamics. And I do believe that's what I believe. But it is that those problems don't go away. Like, especially also, people, Eric Weinstein has said, well, we need to spread out if we're going to, avert and solve the twin nuclei problem of cell and atom that has doomed us to, death, which I do believe that is kind of a real thing. That's what I think it means in the Bible when it says, when you eat of the tree of knowledge, you will surely die. Essentially, it's like tree of knowledge, the fruit of the tree of knowledge is tech. It's the bitten apple. And, you will surely die. It's like either via nukes, either via biological, creations. Trying to avoid saying certain words on the live stream. I don't know what kicked me off yesterday, but something. And then, or just the complete destruction of our social environments. I mean, human beings are not going to go on if we don't have families and children, and our social media environment does not incentivize this at all. It disincentivizes it. And also, how are you even overcoming the threats of any of these things if you can now go? It's almost like people who are like, we need to decentralize. The blockchain will save us because decentralization is freedom. It's like, no, it appears that way for a little bit, but actually your decentralization is actually complete centralization. This is exactly what is also true of like the ability to sidestep light speed and be like able to go anywhere you want. All of a sudden, it doesn't matter that you're spread out, because distance becomes a non-factor. Eric Weinstein is very wrong on this. Like, very wrong. I don't understand how that's even the equivalent of spreading out. You've destroyed, actually, distance mattering. Completely. You've completely gotten rid of it. It's no longer a factor. If you can sidestep light speed or sidestep relativity to travel, you have destroyed relativity as being able to, or space being able to be a buffer in any way. Even it's less of a buffer than it is for some person to live on one side of, in Orange County versus somebody in Los Angeles. There's more of a buffer there than there is between one side of the universe and another if you can sidestep the constraints of light speed. Then there's no buffer. Send a nuke like that, destroy somebody like that, follow somebody like that. It's like there's no escape at all anymore. Distance means nothing. The same thing is if all communication goes towards entanglement. There's no escaping messages. There's no escaping social media. There's no escaping the internet. And what I think is happening is kind of slowly is like, when that happens, the internet becomes the universe. It's literally like you're building the internet according to the laws of the universe at that point, and then it's going to go to mirror you're literally making the internet within the universe. You're making a web of the universe within the universe. It's so perfect, but it's also just kind of profound, and that you are destroying the buffer of relativity. And that's kind of, I think, an inevitability. So I'm not saying we need to avoid that. I'm not saying we need to pursue that. I just think it's an inevitability, and that happens. So I totally disagree with Eric Weinstein of like, we can get warp speed, then we'll be able to spread out so that we don't destroy each other. It's like, nope. All of a sudden, there's no escape. It's the same exact thing as somebody who's like, we really need to decentralize. It's like, nope. All of a sudden, you just completely centralized everything. There's now, it's not a duopoly anymore between uh, you know, I don't know, Facebook and Google, or like Apple and Windows. It's like, no, now it's just the blockchain. And Eric knows that, but he hasn't applied this to like real life. But that's probably part of the reason geometric unity is incomplete. Okay, let's see. They don't necessarily need to have ever left Earth. No, they don't. But I think they did. But some people don't. And that's fine. Did he explain what he thought was dangerous? I forgot what I was talking about when you said that. Did he... What exactly he meant by Wendigo? I mean, he meant Wendigo. Like, that's what he meant. The guy who was that disclosure guy. That's he said it. I mean, you got to take people at their word. It's like when people are like, well, Einstein constantly spoke about God and said things like, the more I learn about science, the more I believe in God, or, I just want to know whether or not God had any choice in the laws of the universe. And then we're like, but he didn't really mean God. It's like, you have to take people at their word. Like, you can't just do that because it's convenient with your worldview. But if Einstein believed in God, then every physicist who doesn't right now isn't even, like, approaching Einstein. They're literally antithetical to Einstein. And they don't want to do that because they've turned Einstein into an idol. Einstein's name, interestingly enough, means, like, first stone. A lot of people dismiss Einstein, and, like, there's certainly been many incredible thinkers in the world, but you can't kind of dismiss Einstein's contribution to actualizing, an awareness of certain phenomenon to the society as a whole. Like, that is very true. And it is interesting, like, Einstein means like one stone, or like first stone. And makes sense. It makes a lot of sense the more you think about it. I've seen some interesting things in aerial photos of aerospace junkyards. Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Tucson, Arizona. That's the biggest boneyard, aerospace boneyard in the world. Like, just, like, you should look that up. Maybe I'll look it up in a minute. It's an amazing thing. Like, there's a lot of fascinating stuff, but I don't think that any of the truly fascinating stuff is kept in an aerospace junkyard. I think it's kept in a bunker underground. Or in hangars that are off limits to most people. Michael Shermer and others already looked completely ridiculous to anybody with an open mind. That's true. Yep. Like, I love the interview with him and Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock with Joe Rogan about, like, a previous civilization here on Earth. Michael Shermer's just arguing against it, and basically his argument is the establishment hasn't agreed. Okay? That's fine. Establishment has said many things over time that have been overturned. But it's funny because, like, we're totally going to go in a circle and we are going in a full circle of what the establishment believes. It says it in the Zohar, I think. It's like, the knowledge of God will come back into the world towards the end of days, essentially. It's like, we're nearing that. Geometric unities and all these other theories are part of moving towards that rediscovery of God. It's going to take time, and it's a process. It's a multi-step process. But it's going to happen. It's just inevitable. Like, I can't tell you that, like, I would have told you many years ago that aliens seem to be an inevitability. And if you don't believe that the universe has a purpose, it does seem that that's true. I can't tell you that that's true anymore. I'm not saying that they exist or don't exist. It might be that it is inevitability, but I just don't see why. But I mean, I am thoroughly convinced that God is an inevitability. Like, thoroughly convinced. And I've explored the subject extremely from both sides of it, and with a degree of rigor that I haven't explored anything else in my life. So, like, I mean, it does seem like that's an inevitability. But it does also seem like it's true that there's other beings around here. But like I said, might have been... I do believe, at least in part, something... holdovers from a previous civilization on Earth. Like, I do believe that. Potentially. So, that makes sense to me a lot. But I don't know, for sure. We'll see. But Michael Shermer is ridiculous. At least his thinking is ridiculous. You can't call yourself a skeptic. You can't be skeptical of everything. It's impossible. We have to kind of have this, like, kind of trust in something as an assumption in order to start doing anything. And really what that is your own existence. But and that's what inevitably is what you trust in. But it's, even if you disagree with the existence of yourself as a self, but it's still, like, you can't do that in action. You can't be like, I don't actually believe that I exist, and then act according to that. Good luck. According to the mainstream, history is divided into 6 eras. I didn't know that, but that makes sense. Like I say a lot, like, God works on all levels. I've seen that. It's like there are multiple fractalizations of the same pattern that occur in different levels. So yeah, 6 eras, that makes sense. I think that there's 6,000 years since the beginning of when the Jewish calendar starts keeping record right now. Jewish year. Right now, what is it? It is the year 5781 right now. According to tradition, the Hebrew calendar started at the time of creation. So what the end of, I guess, like, the beginning of this civilization, I think, is when it would have started. And that's probably correct, actually. It's probably extremely correct. Like, not even approximate. It's probably pretty much perfect. That would be the objective year that this civilization started. Like, this coherence civilization, to some degree. And what caused that? I don't know. Have to look into it. But that means that the Hebrew year 6000, according to classical Jewish sources, the Hebrew year 6000, which is going to be, oh my God, from sunset of 29 September 2239 until nightfall on 16th of September 2240 on the Gregorian calendar, marks the latest time for the initiation of the Messianic era. I think the earliest time for the initiation of the Messianic era is 2040. But the latest time is 2240. So there's like 200 years, it seems, where, like, somewhere in that time, we're going to enter the Messianic era. When that is, up to God. But it probably will be within that time frame, which is, between now and then, we have the end times to deal with. The belief that the seventh millennium will correspond with the Messianic age is found on a universalized application of the concept of Shabbat. This is exactly what, it's another one of those things of like God working on all levels. It's like each millennium is considered a day or a period. Here, let's share my screen. Interesting that it's 2,240, and I think that 2040 is when I had heard that, like, that's the start of when it could happen. This is the end of when it could happen, somewhere between that. They say don't predict it. I'm not gonna give it a year, but I did kind of like at some point assume that around 2040 we could see this potentially. And then I looked, and that is also when the singularity is predicted by a bunch of computer scientists at the Singularity Summit. That was the average of the dates that they had, various people had given. That makes a lot of sense as well. And of course, it seems to perfectly coincide with this as well. The date by which the Messiah must appear is 6,000 years from creation. It's probably true. It's not that it must appear on that date. It's that it must appear by that date, and that it could come earlier, but not too early, because we also need to be ready for it. Like, this is all about technology, and you can't just have like we couldn't have the Messianic era tomorrow. You need like lots of things going on, probably to be communicating via entanglements, and to be running on a blockchain, and lots of things. Six eons. It's almost like aeons. Going in and coming out. For war and peace, the seventh eon is entirely Shabbat, rest for life, everlasting. Fascinating. Lubavitcher Rebbe, the leader of Chabad, and they are definitely I will say, like, they are the authorities, I would pretty much, on Judaism right now. As far as like halacha and things like that, they're considered it. It's funny because they're also like the closest. Their mentality is the closest to Christianity. Weird. The English year 2021, corresponding to the Hebrew year 5781, thus marks 12:44 p.m. on the Millennial Friday. It's like the doomsday clock almost. But it's like the saves day clock instead of the doomsday clock. It's like the opposite. Interesting. But let's see. Oh, by the way, this is that place near where I grew up. Uh, Tucson Boneyard. Look at that. Dang. It's just huge. It's next to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. And it's just like filled. Look at that. Wild. A lot of these are just scrap for parts. Yeah, you can see there. You drive by this on the way to my parents' house from the airport. Drive by it on the way from the airport to anywhere in Tucson, but so it doesn't really tell you much. But it tells you that I've driven by it many times. Look at that. B-1 bombers, F-111s, C-130s, F-18s, F-104s, B-52s. Obviously, I am an aerospace nerd. I know every plane there. That's pretty good. It is amazing how many B-52s we have had in service. It's like a little bit mind-blowing. And a lot of them are still in service. F-16s. These are the Catalina Mountains. These are the mountains that I grew up at the base of over there. It's just beautiful. I'll show you. Like, I grew up near here. This is not where my parents live anymore, but it's gorgeous. I love this place. This is like one of my favorite places in the world. This is Sabino Canyon. There's a beautiful creek, and I would go there and catch snakes and stuff like that as a kid. Like, once I went on a date to here, which is Seven Falls. This is the worst date I've ever been on. I sunburn extremely easily on my face and everywhere else, and wasn't thinking. And I went on a date with this girl. First date I went on with this girl, and last date I went on with this girl. Worst date I've ever had. This is like story time. And this is Seven Falls. It's just beautiful, and it's quite a hike. And I I had decided to ask this girl on a date to I was at a party and I met at a friend's house, and like she was into like wildlife and hiking, and I was like, she had just told me that she'd been on this one hike that I'd never been on, but I had always wanted to go. And then I was like, well, I've always wanted to go to Seven Falls, which is a different hike, similar though, to the one she went on. And I was like, we should go. And she was like, so you like, I showed her like pictures of snakes that I had taken in the wild, and she was like, oh, so like no, I don't know, you like go and, well, I told her I was like going with biologists to like study snakes, which is true. And I was showing her photos from it. She was super into it. And this is why you should embrace your hobbies. You will be impressive even to people that don't like snakes. And don't hide your competency, even in things that are like niches. And she was like, I've never seen a snake in the wild. And I was like, I can't believe you've never seen a snake in the wild in Tucson. I was like, I could show you a snake anytime you want to see a snake. That sounds like an innuendo, but it wasn't meant to be. And she was like, oh yeah, like, well, we should It just sounds so much like an innuendo, but uh, she was like, "Oh yeah, well, you should show me a snake sometime." I was like, "Well, I'll show you a snake sometime." So like, I was like, I invited her to go on a hike with me to. I figured we'd go to Seven Falls and I would find a snake along the way, usually garter snakes, if nothing else. And we're walking. We start at 8 a.m. in the summer of Tucson, Arizona, and by 9 it's over 100 degrees. 10 it's probably over 110 degrees. We're walking. I didn't put on any sunscreen. I'm bad about it, and but that's which is not good. But I was really bad about it. I had not gone in like a hike like this in a long time, because I was back home for the summer during college, and I where we were walking, we almost gave up on the hike because we didn't realize how far this was and how hot it was going to be. And then we asked these people, we were like, "How close are we?" Because we saw them with towels, and of course, they were at Seven Falls. Walking back, and they were like, "You don't have that much further to go." And we had just found this rock to like crawl under for 30 minutes, take a break. Then we keep walking. We finally get there, and we get into the water, and it's actually like finally pretty nice. And we actually had a nice time, and then we decide to walk back. It is now the middle of the day. It is so unbearably hot and sunny. I am burning on I'm really white. Like, I burn everywhere here and like here, and it's just everywhere. I'm super white. So, um, I can't hold my arms in front of me anymore, and I have to put them behind me, and I'm walking like with my arms behind me because even just exposing them to the sun, I feel them just scalding. And uh, not even talking about like my face yet. And we are walking, and I honestly thought like multiple times that we could die. I mean, and honestly, if it was a less populated hike, we could have died. It was that bad. It was the worst mistake I had ever made as far as hiking goes, and I am really good about the desert. Like, I know what I'm doing. I am aware of all the dangers that are out there. I've saved people. I saved Paulina from stepping on a rattlesnake like mid stride once, and like other people as well. And I grew up a desert kid, like always outside. I also knew how to beat the heat was to not be out in the heat. But the difference was with this was that I wasn't just going out whenever I wanted to go out, whenever I knew, things would be out or anything like that. It was like specifically working around, you know, going on a date with this girl. It wasn't about, I wasn't thinking with this. And so, um, uh, I ended up like, honestly, almost calling 911 because I didn't know what we were going to do. Like, I could not even think about how we were going to continue walking, but we also just had to continue walking. But the entire time I'm feeling the sun just destroy me. And she was not doing well either at all. And we're walking now. And I'm somebody that, like, I will be very upset or like, very bored or whatever, wherever we are. And then if I find a snake, like, it's like, that's awesome. All of a sudden I'm like totally mood change and everything. But this was not that. But I'm walking, and out of the corner of my eye, I see a garter snake like 100 feet away down in the creek. And we're like walking above the creek back to the car. And I just look, I point to it. I didn't even stop walking. And I was just like, there's your snake. And she looked and she was like, oh, I see it. We just kept walking. That was it. There was we didn't even like walk towards it. We didn't even stop moving. And we almost, I honestly, this was like the point where I was going to call for help. And I knew exactly where we were. We were not lost. You could not get lost at all. Like, it wasn't even, it was only like a few miles, but it was so incredibly hot. It was like being on the surface of an alien planet. It was not a habitable zone. And all of a sudden we came to this pool that was just like literally just a mud pool with like algae covering the top of it and everything, just gross. We both didn't even take our shoes off, didn't even take our clothes off. I don't even know how we remembered to take our phones out, and we just dove into the water. And if it wasn't for that pool, like we wouldn't, I would not have made it. We probably would have had to have called 911, or somebody else would have found us dying or dead. It was that hot. It was such a huge mistake that I made. And it was a place that I knew, like I know Sabino Canyon like the back of my hand. And this was a different path than Sabino Canyon. So it was a little bit unknown to me, but I still knew, like, you can't get lost. I just didn't know how much further, you had to walk to get to the falls, but we were on our way back, so I knew how much further we had to go. And but we're just sitting there in this pool, and it is like a godsend. And I look over at her, and she looks at me, and this little turtle just like floats up to the surface and sticks his head through the algae of the water, and he's just like looking at us like, you guys are idiots. And then we just got out of the pool covered in algae, like totally. This is like the last pool you want to jump into, but it also, we would not have made it without it. I don't think we could have. And but after that we were much better, and then we were able to walk literally it was probably half mile from there to the car. That was it. And we get to there, and then I ended up having second-degree burns on my face. Like, that's not an exaggeration at all. And I took her to like this smoothie place, got her a smoothie, drove her home, and she was so burned. I was so burned. We both had like second-degree burns on our faces. And I just remember like watching her walk into her house and thinking like, I am never going to hear from that girl again. And I never did. I never tried to contact her again. She never tried to contact me. We got along perfectly fine, but the date was such a disaster that both of us just kind of wanted to forget it. But it was now at this point an incredible story. I mean, it was the biggest mistake I've ever made as far as like hiking goes. So if you are not aware how hot Arizona is, like even somebody like me who is so good at maneuvering and in the desert, to the point where like I rarely burned in Arizona, because even though I didn't wear sunscreen very often, because I just avoided, those times of day being out. You end up being basically nocturnal with your friends, and also being awake very early, going for hikes very early, and also late in the afternoon or evening. But that's it. But if you're not thinking with your brain and you are thinking about a girl, you kind of abandon all logic. And that's just, we've talked about it before. It's like Stefan Molyneux gave his only pencil to that girl during a test when he knew that if he didn't have a pencil, he was going to fail it. And he did fail it. And that girl asked him for a pencil, and he still gave her the pencil. That's what I did. I just forgot everything that I knew about how to stay alive in the desert. And you can actually be outside all day long in the desert and stay perfectly alive, but you just can't move around. You have to find a shady spot under a rock and stay there until the sun goes down. And like, I've done that before, and it's not a huge deal. Just like do it because you can't do anything else. But that wasn't really an option, or it didn't seem like it at the time. It probably was, but dang. I've gotten burned before, but never like this. It looked like I had been lit on fire. Like it had destroyed me. It wasn't just like red. It was like really bad. Crazy. Worst date I've ever been on. Michael Shermer's blue pill incarnate. Then who is red pill incarnate? Either Tyler or Tom Campbell. I don't know who is blue pill incarnate or red pill incarnate. I don't want to call myself that, but I get what you're saying. I'll say that. Because I'm, I will admit, it's become much easier for me to be honest. And it does seem to be much easier for me than it does for other people. But I will also say, like, I've also realized that there are times when I'm not very good at being honest, but I also avoid like mass communication during those times. So like if I'm really pissed like about something, I try and not speak about it. So until then. So, there's been aspects of my life that I was angry about that I did not speak about on here until, I was ready to do it without basically just, I don't know, being out of control is a better way of putting it than like saying lying. But when you're out of control, you sometimes don't, you're not honest. Wasn't Tesla also very religious? I think Tesla was a theist. I think the ideal would be a superposition of open-minded towards everything and skeptical of everything simultaneously. Yeah, that is true. Definitely. The thing you should be most skeptical about is yourself and your ego. Yep, exactly. That's basically what I kind of just hinted at, is like you have to know that there are instances where you are not capable of being trustworthy, of being honest, and like avoid those things. And like I've had to do that. And also there were instances where I kind of started to just fail at being in control. Like once I got on here in the middle of the day, and I didn't mean to get on here to, stream about and rant, but I had got on here to show my work to people in the Discord conversation, and I was cut like during the Discord conversation as I was starting to get on here. And by the time the stream had started, I was just so pissed. I think it was only like Chris and like a couple other people had jumped on the call, and I was just ranting, and I was like a bit out of control, because I'm fine with people telling me I'm wrong. Doesn't bother me. I expect it. I know, I'm well aware, like I've said before, of what it looks like to make the claims that I make, and to be me and make the claims that I make. I'm well aware of what it looks like, so I'm not upset by skepticism. It's frustrating sometimes when it becomes a little bit like irrational, but it's not even, it doesn't anger me. But if you're going to cut me out of the conversation because you can't handle me even being there, that will piss me off, I will say. And I was pissed because I wasn't told that I was wrong. I was just cut. Like I wasn't allowed to show my work. And people wanted to see it too. It wasn't like nobody wanted to see it. If nobody wanted to see it, I wouldn't have been there. But like lots of people wanted to see it, and then the mods had like cut me out because they said that I was too eloquent, and that was dangerous because it meant that people might believe my nonsense. Like imagine being told that we're cutting you because you make too much sense. That's that irrationality that I'm talking about. That's like frustrating. And it's frustrating, but it's beyond frustrating when they cut you for it. But I was so mad, and after like 2 minutes of just ranting, I was like, I looked at the camera, I was like, I need to get off because I need to like recollect myself, and I just deleted it, that stream, because it was only 2 minutes long, and it was just me pissed. And I think I called like the moderator a girl. I was like, and they were not a girl, like they were a guy, so it's an insult. It's not an insult to be a girl, it's an insult to be called a girl if you're a guy, and it's an insult to be called a guy if you're a girl. But it's not an insult to be a guy or to be a girl. It's just an insult to be called that if you are not that. And I basically just called him a little girl, and like that's not something I need to leave up. I'll be honest that I did it. I'm not hiding anything, but I don't need it to be seen. But I'll tell you that I said it. But that's like, I hadn't started lying because obviously it wasn't being wasn't being literal when I called him a girl, but I realized I was out of control, and like if you're out of control, that is when you start to lie. So usually that's when you lie. It's not. Sometimes you lie because you're in perfect control and like you have for some reason decided to lie, but a lot of times when you are say things that are untrue, it's because you're out of control. Like your ego has just like gone rampant. Instead of leaves and fishes, the new Messiah will give unto us with mac and cheese. Loaves, not leaves. Damn. Autocorrect. Instead of loaves and fishes, the new Messiah will give unto us bugs and mac and cheese. Oh, like the false Messiah? I don't know what you mean. Like people talk about like how the future they're gonna make us just eat bugs. By the way, crickets and grasshoppers are kosher, according to the Torah. So I don't have a problem with that. But I'm not eating roaches. But that's not a kosher bug. But crickets and grasshoppers are kosher. Like it says it in it's like a insect with a joint in its back leg that, you know, it's clearly talking about like a locust or a cricket or a grasshopper, which is interesting that like locusts are like kosher to eat. I believe I may have been to Seven Falls in Texas or Hawaii. Yeah, there's definitely like a lot of those like Seven Falls type places in different areas. They look very similar, and sometimes they're called Seven Falls. Definitely should have worn a sombrero, a sombrero yarmulke. I don't know how to pronounce what you said, but it's very funny. It's a sombrero yarmulke. Yes, definitely should have. Yeah, it was scary. We both almost died. I mean, really, like, it was closest I had ever come to like ever calling for help in the wilderness. I've never had that happen before. I've always been like, I know what I'm doing, like, hopefully nobody gets bit by a Mojave rattlesnake and we have to call a helicopter. But other than that, like, pretty good. And this was the first time that like the elements had gotten to us, and it was very serious. You always wonder, like, how does that person, end up in that situation where they just, end up, I don't know, dying of heat exhaustion. It's like, don't you know that you can crawl under a tree? It's like, yes. But were they on a date? That's the question. Were they on a date or were they from out of town? And if either one of those things are true, they're probably true. Like, if that happens. I was imagining a robot messiah of some kind. Well, I do think that Jesus is coming back in the tech. So, kind of. First, it's going to be the anti-messiah in the tech, though. Yeah, they really want us to eat insects for some reason. It's because of the efficiency of it. Like, and I will admit, like, as somebody who's kept a lot of feeder insects for my animals, roaches, I've bred mealworms and crickets and, and roaches, dubia roaches. Like, dubia roaches are the easiest thing in the world to produce. Like, roaches are incredibly easy to keep. They don't die very easily like crickets and things like that. They just very easy. They don't require a lot of food. I understand why people think that they're a good choice for making like protein, but there's something, about them that I don't think that, like, just because I think that they're good for lizards to eat doesn't mean I think they're good for us to eat. Plus, I will tell you, even lizards like crickets and grasshoppers so much more than they like roaches. So much more. And I don't know why. Maybe it's because of kosher. Just imagining. Super cheap too, yes, super cheap. But I love steak. I don't know if I could give up meat. Like, I love steak. Steak is my favorite food in the world. It is. Like, well, I don't think there's anything that I like as much as steak. Like, if there's any food that I feel like also makes me feel like, I don't know, like, and have endorphin highs to some degree, it's like a good steak. Every time I eat like a really good steak, I am just amazed at how good it makes me feel. I don't know if that's like a good thing or not, but it's kosher. Like, I think it's fine. But there's also, I do understand, like, I love animals. Like, I love cows. They're very cute. Like, I've told the story before here of like I had a goal of catching a baby cow once. Like, its mom like protected it, and like it's like a huge thing. It was, but I had always, I mean, cows. I get it. Cows are cute. Like, I don't know why I wanted to catch the baby cow. It wasn't to eat it. I just wanted to like hold it, take a photo, and let it go on its way. And like, cows are cool. I like animals of all kinds, but I also love steak. It's, once I've, speaking of like UFOs, I did ask this guy who's like been very into UFOs for a long time, and I was like, do you think that if I was like, if do you think that if assuming that there are beings here from other worlds, like, do you think that they are friendly, or do you think that they are hostile? And he was like, he just said to me once, and this stuck with me very much. He was like, do you like uh do you like deer or something? And, or he said, he was like, some people, or he was, I think he said, would you save a deer if it needed it? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, would you eat a deer? I was like, yeah. And he was like, there you go. It's like some people eat deer, and sometimes people save deer, and it's like that kind of like reframed the entire thing for me, and it was like, weird. That makes a lot of sense. It's like, maybe, are they hostile is the wrong idea. Are we hostile to animals when we abduct them in the middle of the night for scientific research? Like, I remember once I was on a rattlesnake study, and like, I had like an epiphany while we were doing this. And like, I remember we were on these like side of this uh mountainous area, and there's all these rock slides, and there was this type of rock rattlesnake that was there. And I was there with some biologists, and uh is actually, like, I've done this with a number of biologists. If anybody has ever seen like Animal Planet, I've like gone with Mark O'Shea before, who used to have like O'Shea's Big Adventure on Animal Planet. I've gone with him to like rattlesnake study sites and stuff like that. And but once I was with these biologists, and we are looking for rattlesnakes, and this beam of light, like from our flashlight, like hits a rattlesnake, because we see it, and then you grab it with these like metal tongs gently, and then they took thermometers, and they like check their temperatures via, I'm not saying this is necessary to do, I don't really think that it is, but I understand why they think it is. And they had taken like the snake's temperatures by sticking a thermometer up its butt, and like then they weigh it and do all kinds of things, and catalog it, and then they release it right back where they found it. And I was like, we just basically did an alien abduction. Like, that thing is gonna go to its friends and be like, guys, you're not gonna believe what happened to me, but I was like, this beam of light came down, and then this like metal hook thing like came and picked me up and like put me in this like white room, which is, bucket. And then uh there was like these flashes of light from cameras, and then they like stuck a probe up my butt, and then they released me back where they found me. And I just like thought about like what it would tell its friends if it told anything, if it had told that story. And it's like, it would sound exactly like an alien abduction. Exactly. Like, exactly. And then I was kind of just like, it was kind of freaky to me. Like, I remember looking up at the stars after that, and like, we're on the middle of nowhere, and uh, it was like, crazy amounts of stars. It's just beautiful. And I was just like, what if like that had just happened to us after we had done that to that snake? It's like, it reminded me of that phrase, there's always a bigger fish. And that's, maybe that's true. Yes, I went herping with Mark O'Shea. Um, like Frank Ritas is my mentor in like the herpetological world, which is reptiles. And he called me one day and he's like, "You want to go herping with Mark O'Shea?" And I was like, "Yes." It was a lot of fun. I actually like. I may have or may have not, had my first beer at a bar, uh, in the middle of nowhere. May, at an undisclosed age that may or may have not been quite 21, with Mark O'Shea, which was pretty cool. I'm not vegan, but I think veganism would be the spiritual ideal. I think it is too. I think the Bible says that too, that God intended for us to be vegetarians. But then, because we didn't do that, he gave us rules to follow for how to eat meat if we're going to eat meat. But the original intention for God, for humanity, was to be vegetarians or vegans, I guess. It's how the ecosystem goes in a way. Sacrificing your health is equal to is not is equal to spiritual. It's not equal to the spiritual ideal. I don't know what you're saying. Yeah, it's sacrificing your health is not the spiritual ideal, but it I do think God originally intended for us to not eat meat, um, necessarily, but we did it. I'm not convinced it requires sacrificing your health. Yeah, I don't think it requires sacrificing your health either, to be vegetarian or to be vegan. But I'm also not prepared to do it, so I'm not like advocating for it. Um, Damn, it's exactly the same. Interesting. Yeah. Oh, it's exactly the same. Yeah, it's an alien abduction. How does it not? It's way more nutrient dense and extremely easy to digest meat. Yeah, but you can get nutrients other ways. Like, to say you have to eat meat is wrong. Like, you don't have to eat meat. It's you don't. But if you want to, I think that you should, as long as you try and do it in an ethical way, according, and I think that there's certain ways to do that. But like, you should pursue that on your own. But you should try and do it ethically. Um, I will say, but yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna tell people not to eat meat. I love steak. I get it. A couple times a month, I go to like this market over here that I love that cooks just so much meat on Saturdays, and there's like this huge line outside, and the smoke from the grills out. They have all these barbecues outside, and you can just smell it for like a mile, in either direction, and see the smoke. And people line up to get all different kinds of meat, and I'll get like a tri-tip, and it's delicious. So I have no plans of giving that up anytime soon. I think in England they can drink beer at 16. Yes, they can. Um, Tom Campbell is vegan and he is the healthiest 70-something I've ever seen. I'm not surprised Tom Campbell is vegan. I didn't know that, but that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you can be very healthy and be a vegan. It's just people don't know how to do it. But I am very confident that you could do it. Like, you don't need to eat meat. Maybe the forbidden fruit was fire and meat. The forbidden fruit was technology, which is fire. It's fire. I mean, that's tech. There's no tech without fire. Fire is the, like, first forbidden fruit. In a way. It's like fire and sticks. That place sounds awesome. The place with the rattlesnakes. Yeah, it's beautiful. But actually, I don't think I have the photos of Mark O'Shea on here. I have it on a hard drive, but I'll get some and I'll send some to you. Torin. All the strongest animals are vegan. Like an ox or a horse. Exactly. It's like, look at a rhinoceros. A rhinoceros is a vegan. An elephant is a vegan. You don't think that you can be healthy? Like, I realize you're not an elephant and you're not a rhinoceros and you can't just eat, what they eat, but there's ways to get, you can't eat just grass. But we don't have the stomach for it, obviously. We don't have like that, chambered stomach that you would need to just eat what they eat. But there's plenty of other plants that are much easier to digest than grass. Yeah, it grows in trees. Yeah. Yeah, it's there's nothing it's not a sacrifice to be a vegan. But one of the things I have never understood is, like, people will say, I'm a vegetarian, but then they eat eggs and they eat, which is like, you're not a vegetarian if you eat eggs. It's a cell of an animal. Like, you're not a vegetarian. Same thing. I get that it's if it's unfertilized, then it's not going to grow into an organism, but still. Or like, fish. People will eat fish and they're like, I'm a vegetarian, I just eat fish. I'm like, what are you talking about? You're not a vegetarian if you eat fish. You're eating meat. You're like eating the birds of the sea. That's like what it means to eat fish. Like, fish are like the birds are like the fish of the air, and like fish are like the birds of the sea. And look at that skeleton. You think that skeleton is plant? Stupid. Makes no sense. There is this weird, like, idea that fish are not really, like, legitimate organisms compared to, like, a bird. Don't get it. I read an account claiming a grizzly snapped a bull's neck in one slap. I totally believe that. You ever seen a grizzly bear's paws? They're literally this big. I'm not even... The claws are like that. It's probably like the most terrifying land animals on Earth that are predators to some degree, at least, is like a polar bear, grizzly bear, same thing in my mind. And like a tiger. Craziest animals on Earth. As far as and probably like crocodiles. But they're kind of halfway between land and water predators. Shark is water. That's the scariest animal in the world. But that's because of the water. It's not necessarily just because of the animal. Oh, the gorillas. Yeah, gorillas are pretty amazing. But I saw a hippopotamus video today where he killed a gazelle. Like, a gazelle tried to was going to be eaten by some African wild dogs. Which is the actually, in some ways, the scariest animal on earth, because there's nothing that would be worse to be eaten by than African wild dogs. Like, years ago in 2013, this kid, this little 2-year-old, I think, 3-year-old, fell into a pit of 11 African wild dogs at the zoo in Pennsylvania, I think, or it was some zoo. I think it was Pennsylvania, but I'm not sure. I'm gonna look it up. Zoo. Kid. And this was a horrible story. It's the worst tragedy in the history of zoological facilities ever. Falls into wild dog exhibit. Toddler at the Pittsburgh Zoo. I knew it started with P. Killed in painted dog exhibit. 2-year-old kid was being held up by their mom on the guardrail of the African wild dog exhibit and fell. And it was, they were mauled to death by, I think there was 11 wild dogs. And I spoke to that guy, Frank Ritas, who was like my mentor in wildlife and other things, and life in general, I guess. But he worked in zoos. He built zoological exhibits and still does sometimes to, for the Desert Museum, which is a very famous zoo in Tucson, and a bunch of other places throughout time. Has worked at a bunch of zoos across the country. I told him about that story, and he obviously would have heard about it anyways, but I had just spoken to him about it because it happened that day. And he was like, that is the worst animal he could ever have fallen into, like, ever. Of anything. There's nothing that would have been worse. And I was like, why? And he was just like, look it up. I'm telling you, they eat you alive. They don't kill you before they eat you. Like, that's why it's the worst one. There's nothing else that eats you alive like that. I mean, if you look up African painted dogs, eating in the wild, all of a sudden that story becomes the worst story in the world. Like, the worst story in the world. I can't even, like, it's almost unfathomable to think about. I can't believe that parent went through that. Like, it's one thing if, like, a kid falls and then, like, is killed by a tiger. Not nearly as bad as falling into a pit filled with 11 African wild dogs. They would literally rip you apart in front of everyone. I bet you that is basically what happened. And I mean, I'm sure of it. Like, they won't tell you that in the news, but, like, look it up. That's how they eat every single time. They literally rip you apart, and you're alive the entire time. Every animal that they eat, they do not kill you before they start eating you. They just start eating you. And I don't know. I'll never, like, get over that story because of that. Frank didn't even tell me what it was. He was just like, just look up how they eat. And I was like, I looked it up. Holy God. That's the worst thing. Just the worst tragedy ever. Let's see here. Like, there's like, zoo deaths. This is totally taking a turn. But worst animal attacks in zoos. This isn't about intellectual credibility, but that's fine. Worst. Five shocking zoo attacks. Like, nothing's worse than that one, so, like, anything else is honestly, like, not nearly as tragic. Polar bear exhibit. Woman jumped in 2009 into the polar bear, entering the polar bear in feeding time. After thrashing in the enclosure's moat with a polar bear biting her back, the woman was pulled to safety, treated for severe injuries. I might look at that in a minute. I think I've seen that. At least she survived. That's good. In 2008, the Singapore Zoo, 3 white Bengal tigers mauled a zoo cleaner to death after the man walked through a moat surrounding their enclosure. Why would you do that? Oh, he was trying to basically die. That makes more sense. In San Francisco in 2007, a 350-pound Siberian tiger managed to escape its cage. The tiger mauled 3 men, killing one of them. Dang. It's wild that they would escape and just maul somebody to death after that, because their entire life has not been seeing humans as food. You know, it's weird. I mean, I understand there's instincts there, but that would kick in, obviously, but you would expect it to be actually kind of rare. That it would happen, that they would kick in so fast after escaping. The animal traveled over a 20-foot wall and a 15-foot moat. Well, a moat is not a stopping a tiger, but a 20-foot wall is just, obviously there was a problem. Creating habitats like that keep animals in, like cages, but like not just cage that's a simple cage, but like a habitat, is something that has always just fascinated me. And that like I do that here. I've not had a single snake, knocking on wood, you know, that's not even wood, but I've not had a single snake escape in like, okay, I had one snake escape, and it was a ground snake, which is like smaller than, it's literally like skinnier than a pencil and about like 9 inches long, and it had escaped a tiny cage that I had it in once, and I found it crawling. I'd gotten back from a trip to Israel, actually, and so I don't know, sometime during that time it had escaped and it had gotten onto my windowsill, but it couldn't get down because it was so small, and it just sat on my windowsill for some, I don't know how long, but I'd come back and it was just still sitting on the windowsill. But then I figured out how it had escaped. But other than that, I've not had a single animal escape, or not had a single snake escape. I do keep these geckos. I've talked about them before. Those bright blue and yellow geckos, the neon day geckos. Those little bastards, like, when I first got them, first day, I'm sitting in my room and they're in the cage that I had created for them, and then I had heard like these things are the greatest escape artists, and they're designed to like go into like little cracks in bamboo. And I'm sitting in my bed, and all of a sudden I saw something like move like over near the cage, and I couldn't tell if like in my peripheral vision I had seen one moving inside the cage or if it had been like outside the cage. And I remember, you know, everybody told me, beware, they are escape artists, beware, they are escape artists, and I was like, oh, whatever, like I haven't had a snake escape in like 15 years other than that one, and which I found, you know, and then like I look over and both of them had just escaped like immediately in this tiny little hole in the cage. I patched the hole and I've not had an escapee since. But and then actually I did have some morning geckos hatch. That morning geckos all clone themselves, and there's a few varieties, and they just stay the same. But the Hawaiian varieties, which is what a lot of people like, I have Hawaiian varieties and Indo-Australian varieties, and then I also have like Philippine varieties. But the Philippine varieties and the Indo-Australian varieties are slightly bigger in the size of their babies, and I didn't know that. I thought that they were all the same size, and the babies cannot fit through the screen of one of the cages that I keep them in, and then the Hawaiians can. So I didn't even realize that I was having babies escape of the Hawaiians, and then once Paulina was watering her plants, and they like babies just jumped out, and then um, like later that day, like she was typing on her computer and one was sitting on the keyboard. But I then moved them to a different cage and with smaller screen. But I didn't know, that they had even hatched. So I do understand how things escape, but like it's always fascinating how you figure out like how to keep them in. It reminds me of like the Truman Show. It's like, how do we keep this thing in its environment, in its habitat? That's not just like a prison. That doesn't look like a prison, I guess. I heard in the Philippines a mom accidentally dropped her baby into a hippo's mouth when they were feeding it watermelons. That is the worst. That's almost as bad as the painted dogs. That's horrible. Oh my god. I can't even. Oh my god. I'm not even saying that in vain. Like, oh my god. That is like the only God could help you get past that. That is really horrible. I had a visual in my mind due to what you just said that was just not good. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't have told me. I was looking up worst zoo, uh, uh, instances, but still, that's bad. I feel like I could take on like 11 painted dogs. I think about it too, and I'm like, I could take on 11 painted dogs. Once that guy Frank asked me, he's like, you know what, you know how you beat a dog, like, or a wolf, or like a canine, and I was like, no, because I had tried to get this dog that was on a stray on the side of the road once, and it was just not looking good, and I pulled over. Well, I was with my mom, pulled over, and I was like trying to get it to come near me, and it started to, and then all of a sudden it just freaked out and like came, and it was gonna attack me, and it was freaking out, and I was like backing up and trying. I was gonna run towards this tree, and I kind of like got this tree in between the two of us, and my mom just like cuts the car like right in between the two of us. And if that thing had like been a couple steps forward, she would have just hit it with the car and not had a second thought. But she got the car in between us, luckily, because I had created a little bit of distance. And then I just jumped in the car and we left the dog. But I was talking to him about it, and he was like, you know what you do like when the dog gets you, and basically said like, you grab it by the hind legs and you just throw it basically. And I mean it works better with dogs that are not 150 pounds or something. So good luck doing that with a full grown wolf. But with a painted dogs are not that big. They're about the size of my dog Maya. Speaking of, I think that you guys can meet Maya actually, because she just got a bath today. Hold on. This is my wild dog. Come on. Whoa, come on. Okay, sit. This is Maya. Hi. There's not a whole lot of room here because like I have to bring the computer forward. But hopefully like we'll see how bad this looks. Oh, you messed up my frame, Maya. There we go. This is Maya. She just got a bath at the groomers. That's why she's all. They put this on there. I don't put that on there. It gets ripped off in like a day. But she went to the groomers. She's about the size of a wild dog, and she's got like the same build. I feel like I could take Maya, but the thing is though is you do think that, and my friend trains sit. Maya, sit. She's like not working. She's like, why are we in this tiny little space? Okay, hold on. Okay, go. Good job. It's a very small space because of like the camera setup. But hold on, let me put it back. No, it can't. Okay. That is she's a Belgian Malinois, and like they're like the size of a painted dog. Similar build, but my friend, like she's like the Belgian Malinois that went to like the boot camp and like failed. um and would rather like I don't know, she's like be the class clown. But uh like my friend trains Belgian Malinois for police agencies, and his Belgian Malinois, when I messed with that thing, it was the first time in my life that I thought a dog could take me. Like not just hurt me, but like take me. And I mean, just the sheer athleticism and is just wild. But the thing is, though, is that a Belgian Malinois is actually like quite a bit above an African painted dog as far as just like physical abilities. I think if you ever see like a Belgian Malinois do like a crazy things, like look at this. And my dog can do this. She's just like not as I don't know. She's a little different. She's like me. She's not as good at like uh being a grunt. Um Look at this. This is amazing. Good luck taking this. You think you can take a dog, and then you meet a Belgian Malinois that's like really capable, and you're like, nope, no, you can't. And my dog can do this. Like, she just doesn't, you know, have uh, the level of training or the level of drive to be, you know, the dog that goes on Osama bin Laden raids. But which was this is that type of dog that went. But that's also a good thing because if you want a family pet, because the dogs that are the best dogs to go on raids to go get Osama bin Laden are also they are so incredibly they're like on meth like all the time, and and coke, like it's like they mixed coke and meth together, and they're just constantly up running through their bloodstream, and it's like a lot to deal with sometimes. But when I have worked with dogs that are the dogs that are used by uh, police and military before, it was the first time ever I was like, I don't know if I could take this dog. Like, but you're supposed to grab him by the back legs and swing him and just smash him into the ground if you ever get attacked by like a dog, if you can. And I grew up. This was my first dog. This is the biggest dog in the world. This was my family's first dog, and honestly, this dog could have taken me to these, but they're just so gentle that you don't even think about it. But that's how big they are. It's like 190 pound dog, and my dad is 6'2", and he could hold the dog up like this. Like, she's not 6'2", but my dad is 6'2", and he could take the paws of that dog and hold them up in the air. They're so huge. It's like a horse. Mine look like that. It's like white. But they are so incredibly gentle too. It's like, once I had a bearded dragon, which is a kind of lizard that's like very gentle and very good pets. And was holding it as a little kid, and it was my first pet reptile. And I had fallen asleep on the couch watching TV with the lizard, like while holding the lizard. And I woke up, and the lizard was sitting on my dog, my 190-pound dog. It just like, and he just like looked at it and just looked at me and then looked at it and then just like laid back down. The lizard's just like sitting on my dog. I thought my dog was gonna eat it, but he didn't. Only an Irish Wolfhound would have not eaten that lizard. Any other dog would have eaten that lizard, I think. Even Noah, Paulina's little like poodle mix, would have definitely eaten that lizard. That dog wants to kill any dog I've ever seen. I didn't realize you kept ground snakes. I have kept a ground snake. I want to keep more ground snakes, but I don't live where they live. A friend of mine caught it in Phoenix and gave it to my siblings, who then brought it to me while they were coming to meet me before we went on our trip. And that's why it escaped, because I had put it in a cage before we left and hadn't like given it as much examination as I should have. Those painted dogs have the highest hunt success rate of any predator in Africa. I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. I heard. You are completely wrong on thriving on a vegan diet. That aside, what makes you say that God intended us to not eat meat? God wanted humanity to be vegetarian. Let's see. On thetorah.com, did God originally intend for the world to be vegetarian? After the flood, God permits humans to eat animals, whereas in Genesis 1, humans are told to eat plants. Interpreters have understood this to mean that vegetarianism was God's original plan for humanity. Immediately after creating human beings, God blesses them. Here, this is why the Hebrew is so important. It says, immediately after creating human beings, God blesses them in Genesis 1:28 and gives them vegetables and fruit as food. And so here's the Hebrew right here. That's in the Torah, and then it says this is the translation that they're giving. And it's not a complete translation because Hebrew is different. There's so much information packed into Hebrew that's not found in English. It's a gendered language, and so like when it says thou shalt not commit adultery, even in the 10 Commandments, it's only speaking about women, but you wouldn't know that if it was just a translation that's direct. But you would know that if you knew the Hebrew, because you can see that it's speaking about women. But God said, see, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit. They shall be yours for food. And all the animals on land, to all the birds of the sky, and everything that creeps on earth, in which there is breath of life, and all the green grasses for food. And so it was. So it's basically saying that he's giving, because it says, and to all the animals on land, to all the birds of the sky. He's not saying, I give you all the animals on land and all the birds of the sky, because that's not true either. Because later on in the Torah, it starts talking about what is kosher to eat and what is not, and it's not every animal on land, and it's not even all the birds in the sky, because there are some birds that are not kosher. Anything that is like ravens and crows and vultures and any kind of bird of prey or bird that eats carrion, it's not kosher. So it's not even every bird. It's not every animal on the land, because pigs are on land. So it's saying God gave plants to animals uh, that live on land and in the sky, basically. The text doesn't include meat, fowl, or fish, either for humans to eat or even for other animals to eat. According to this passage, all animal life was herbivorous at this point. Omnivores after the flood. After the flood, humans receive different instructions. God again blesses them, again tells them to be fruitful and multiply, and reiterates their dominion over animals, but with an important addition. God mentions consuming animals as food. Here's the Hebrew. Here's the translation that they've come up with. And fear and the dread of you shall be upon all the beasts of the earth and upon all the birds of the sky, everything with which the earth is astir, and upon all the fish of the sea. They are given into your hand, which just means you have control over them. Every creature that lives shall be yours to eat, as with the green grasses, and I give you all these. And so that is odd right there, because that's not true. Later on in the Torah, it talks about what isn't allowed to eat, or what you're not supposed to eat. The Babylonian Talmud, which is slandered by lots of people, but it's also not understood. It's not everything in the Talmud is correct, because it's just a collection of debates. Like, so obviously both sides of, and multiple sides of arguments are in every single argument. So it's not like, it's not scripture. So it's because it's not it. There's no internal consistency to it. It's just a record of debate. So you can't think about the Talmud the way that you think about this. This is different. This is people trying to discussing interpretation of this, and then it's just recorded. So it's not, people don't understand that. But that's, you gotta know if you're gonna talk about the Talmud ever. It's just, it's literally like saying Twitter is correct. It's like, what does that mean? Every single opinion is on Twitter. Rav Yehuda taught in the name of Rav, Adam was not allowed to eat meat. I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon this earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit, and it shall be yours as food. And these are also given as food to all the animals of the land. But animals of the land are not given to you for eating, but God did permit the children of Noah to eat meat. It is written, every creature that lives shall be yours to eat. This is Rashi's commentary on it. I did not, he's saying, like, God did not permit Adam to eat meat, only green grasses, but to you, Noah and descendants, I give everything, just like the green grasses. Modern writers on original vegetarianism. In modern times, a number of thinkers expanded on this idea, arguing that the Torah teaches that vegetarianism is the ideal pristine state to which humanity will yet return. For example, the rabbi and Bible scholar Moshe David something, who 1883 to 1951. What God taught Adam was that you are permitted to use the animals and employ them for your work. You have dominion over them in order to utilize their services for your sustenance, but you must not hold their life cheap nor slaughter them for food. Your natural diet is vegetarianism. Apparently, the Torah was in principle opposed to eating meat. When Noah and his descendants were permitted to eat meat, it was a concession by God, essentially. Possibly. I mean, you can't really, it's pretty obvious that the original text in Genesis, the first text in Genesis, was basically just talking about humans eating plants. Or it was basically saying that animals are above plants in the food chain, which in some ways is true until you die. And then plants are above you in the food chain. But once you're dying, your consciousness isn't really there. So it's like you're not even being eaten. It's like what's being eaten at that point? Molecules. So it's like plants are above molecules in the food chain. They're not above dead animals. Dead animals aren't dead animals. They're, you know, a heap of molecules at that point. They're not even really, like, plants don't even really eat cells. Like it's like those cells break down before they're absorbed by plants. Other than, like, I guess you could say, like, Venus flytraps and other carnivorous plants. But they're weird. Teaches us that vegetarianism is the ideal to which humanity should strive. I do think that. I just admit that I'm not perfect and I'm going to eat fish and meat for now. But at the same time, I used to eat pork and I used to mix meat and dairy all the time, and I loved cheeseburgers and ham and cheese sandwiches and all kinds of other things. And then I stopped eating those, and then I have slowly stopped eating shellfish and other obviously not kosher things. And you know, maybe one day I will stop eating meat, but I don't know. I have no plans on it. I do think it's the ideal. Sometimes you gotta, like, this is that cognitive dissonance thing that I was talking about, though, as far as, like, intellectual credibility. It's like, sometimes you have to be comfortable saying, I am not the ideal. And a lot of people have a problem with this. It's like, people don't want to admit that we're not supposed to or that the ideal would be to not eat meat if they eat meat. It's like, if I eat meat, then it can't be not the ideal. Because if it's not the ideal, it means I'm not ideal. And if I'm not ideal, then, like, I don't want to admit that to the world. You're not ideal. Admit it. Like, I'm not ideal. I'm still going to eat meat. I don't think it's the ideal. I don't. Like, I don't care what anybody says about easy digestion and absorption. I don't care. I don't think it's the ideal. It's not the ideal. It's just not. And anybody that says you can't thrive on a vegan diet, that is wrong. You can do it. What does thriving mean? Like, you're telling me that you cannot, and I'm not talking about, like, breast milk. Obviously, breast milk is part of nature, but, like, outside of that, you mean to tell me that you cannot have as much nutrients as you need to grow in a normal way up to a normal, adult that's healthy enough to reproduce healthy children on a vegan diet? To that, I call BS. That's just too. I just think that that's totally wrong. I'm not saying that it isn't easy to digest meat. I'm not saying that it is easy to digest cooked meat. We know that. You have to cook it for it to be easy for us. But yeah, I mean, you can digest cooked meat. You can digest not cooked meat too. It's just, there's all kinds of health hazards to that potentially sometimes. But also, it's not as easy to digest. But, if you have to cook meat in order for it to be easier to digest, probably not the ideal. But, let's see this. I know you can eat raw meat, but can you eat raw meat? I know you can. I just want to see what it says. I've eaten raw meat before. Raw meat and poultry are the most likely to cause food poisoning, obviously because of bacteria. That's not necessarily because of it itself, It can have all sorts of bacteria. Exactly. Okay, I don't care about foodborne illnesses. I want to know, like, is it more difficult to digest raw meat? Is it more difficult to digest raw meat? I always thought that it was. Okay, the raw food camp claims that cooking meat destroys naturally occurring enzymes that help you digest it, actually. Without these enzymes, your body has to work harder to break it down, making it more difficult to digest. Actually, apparently, I'm wrong. But then it says here, why cooked meat is easier for humans to digest than raw meat. So let's see. Are human stomachs better able to digest cooked meat than raw meat? Humans are omnivores. We do not have the gut structure that a carnivore, such as a cat, has. Digestive juices are not the same as carnivores. Carnivores can actually digest bones up to a certain extent. We did not evolve from carnivores, but from apes, which is, you know, omnivorous, but also mainly herbivorous. We can digest raw meat, think steak tartare, but we get less nutrients from raw than cooked meat. So this is saying the exact opposite of the other one. I don't know which one is true, so I'm not going to claim. But, maybe both are true to some degree. Maybe there's neither is true, and raw meat is no more difficult to digest than cooked. I don't know. But I know you can eat raw meat as long as it's not contaminated with bacteria. I I wouldn't want to eat raw chicken. I'm sure that if it had no bacteria in it, you could do it, but I wouldn't want to do it. I've eaten raw steak, like basically um, once or twice, and I've obviously eaten lots of raw fish because I've eaten sushi and sashimi. But it's like I don't know, weird. Everybody says something different. I don't think we're gonna find any decisive things then. I think that it's safe to assume without bacterial, um, you know, without being contaminated with bacteria, it's pretty safe to eat raw meat if it's not contaminated with bacteria. But cooking it obviously does make it less uh, likely that that's true. And I don't know which one is easier to digest. I would assume that eating raw meat actually is more nutritious than eating cooked meat. I bet cooking it does decrease the nutritional value. I don't really even have to look that up to understand why that makes sense. But that doesn't that's not about how difficult it is to eat or not. I would need to see the evidence that says eating plants is somehow harmful, even if it's harder to digest than meat. But I'm not convinced that that's true either, and I don't know what you mean by meat is easy to digest and absorb. It's like an academic saying they need a source of logical truth to tell you you just showed them. I don't understand how you can put anything touched by the primitive, any religious text, in the same light as pure truth. Oh, how do you put the Torah in the same uh, light as pure truth? There's nothing. I will say this: there's nothing I could say to you that would convince you that that text is truer than anything else that you could go and find. But it is. Your interpretation of what that means is not necessarily the truth. But whether or not there is truth contained in that text at a certain point, in a certain level of analysis, that is super literally true. Meaning, the Torah isn't about what happened, it's about what happens. Always, again and again and again and again and again. If you don't know that, then you don't understand it. And it's not primitive. It's eternal. It is the future, the past, and the present. It's not just about the past. And pure truth is eternally true. Like, anything that isn't eternally true is subjectively true or contextually true, and that is not pure. I like when cheese is cooked inside the burger. I love when cheese is on a burger. That was the hardest thing for me to give up. There are like 1 billion vegan Hindus, right? Yeah, I think there are, actually. I think you can eat raw beef, steak, goat, but not fowl or pig. Yeah, it's much more likely that you're going to get sick from raw pig or fowl. The whole meat vegan debate is so contentious and full of bro-science-y, angry egomaniacs. Can be hard to find good information. Yeah, that's true on both sides of it. Like, people who argue that veganism is the only way is, like, they are usually dogmatic. And so are people who are like, we need to be eating meat, don't take away my steak. It's like, I don't want to take away anybody's steak. I'm going to go get a steak, like, probably this coming weekend. But I also don't think I need it to survive. But I like it, and I do think it's healthy to eat it. Like, I think there's an enormous amount of nutritional value in a steak. More nutritional value in a steak than there is in any salad. You would have to eat a lot more salad to get the same level of nutrients that you get in a steak. I don't deny that at all. But because steak is a more concentrated substance, it's taken lots and lots and lots of plants to make that steak. So it makes sense. It's more nutrient dense, but that doesn't mean that you need it. It just means you need more plants in order to replace it. It's not syntactic. I always have issues like with that word, syntax or syntactic. Chris Langan uses it a lot. In linguistics, syntax is the set of rules, principles, and processes that govern the structure of sentences. So what does that mean, it's not syntactic? I don't know what you mean by that. You'd have to explain more. And it's not just that there's truths in it. The Torah is a mathematical matrix. Fact. Not an opinion. Fact. It's why a kosher Torah is a scroll. And it's why you're not allowed to, like, kosher means, like, it is a scroll. It follows these rules, where there's 42 rows in a column, and there's, interesting number, by the way, and there's this many columns in a block, and, like, every single letter has to be perfectly placed, one right, above and below the next. And what I realized was that what this allows for is it allows it to essentially be put into a spreadsheet. And as somebody who works in Excel, you could take the entire Torah, take all the letters, switch them into the numerical values, and put it into an Excel spreadsheet. And you can't do that in a book, because when you put it into a book in the way that the Bible's been translated, and when you buy a Bible and, like, normal, it now is just put into an arbitrary amount of pages dependent upon the font size and everything, and, like, You've just destroyed the math. You've also, in translating it in the way that makes the most sense today, according to what's being said in the Hebrew, you've destroyed the math. So you might be making sense of what it is. So when it says, thou shalt not commit adultery, you would actually translate it as, and women shall not, cheat on their husbands. And that would be a more accurate definition or translation. But the thing is that you've also just destroyed the math. Like, you've destroyed the math many times over at this point. This is why Jews are like sticklers about maintaining the Torah, like, in just a degree of OCD-ness that seems to be irrational, but it's not. But also, translation is important, but it's not like, that's not why it's divine. It's not divine because of the words alone. It's about the Hebrew words and their numerical correspondence and things like that. When you start diving into that, it becomes very obvious that this is a math equation far too complicated for any human being to have created. Because what it appears when you start looking at the math, and this is what's so amazing about it, is that when you examine it from a mathematical standpoint, all of Scripture, all of it, this is the Quran, this is also the Torah, and even, the New Testament or the Gospel, like, what's amazing about them is it appears that you had to know the end at the same time that you wrote the beginning. Like, mathematically. Like, when you look at the math of it, you're like, whoever wrote the end knew the end before they even wrote the beginning, or not before, but at the same time. It was like, the math looks like it just came out as one. It was like, boom, done. And, we look at this historically, and people are always like, well, you got to examine it from a historical perspective. I hate that analysis. It's not a good one, as far as, like, it doesn't give it any it doesn't add any legitimacy to Scripture to examine it in a historical context. Like, it does give some context as to the writer of the translator, I guess you could say, almost, of it, but it doesn't give it any credence to whether or not it's Scripture. Because Scripture is about eternal truth. It's not about, hey, this was true 3,000 years ago. But like, when you look at the math, and I've looked at it, and it's mind-blowing and it's literally unfathomable, the mathematical order of it. And it's just so much, though, that there's no way of making sense of it all. But when you do start to realize what is going on, you can actually, like, make weird predictions in the math, which I've been able to do, which means which proves a coherence to it that's wild. And then when you start looking at other numbers that come up later on in other scriptures, like, the Quran, and which is legitimate, or the New Testament, also legitimate scripture. When you look at the values of the math in there, and then you see the correspondence that they have to the math in the Torah, which was written first as far as humans go, historically, it's like perfectly corresponding and totally way too complex for any human to have planned. In no way could anybody do it. No way. It's literally impossible. Like, I don't even need any convincing of that. It's impossible for a human to have done that. So, yeah, like, it appears that it was written by an intelligence beyond a human being. But you can put a kosher Torah into, like, like a context like this, and you can't do that with with a like translation of a translation of a translation into an arbitrary amount of pages, and it's just not, you're not going to be able to do it. But you could, you know, it's a spreadsheet like this. Like once I did here. Let's do models. Models.com. That's not what I'm looking for. Models. Probably this one might have it. Like once I looked at, I like literally had made a cell for every single value in the Torah. Okay, yes, I know there's circular references in my math. Thank you. Dang, this is old. This is like every now and then I told you I save a new document. I just did this actually, to another one, but and I have examined math in the Torah, and it is wild. It's wild. I'm not gonna lie at all. Like, it's totally wild. People can say that's crazy. This is me trying to human flourishing. This is Sam Harris. It's like human flourishing. What is? I tried to like figure out. What does human flourishing even mean objectively? This is what the 4 things I came up with: meaning, growth and replication, pleasure, consent. These are the things that I think make up human flourishing. It's not a coincidence that's 4. I didn't try and make it 4. I just couldn't think of anything else that to add that's objective to figure out. Sometimes I'm just like, I don't even know what's going on. I just can see something crazy's happening. I don't remember what I had done. Bad words. Another bad word. Intellectual. Nonsense word. This is old work though. Hebrew. Arabic. All these different languages. I was just looking at language correspondences here. I would like some languages. But here's the Torah. Everything that's green is a letter in the Torah. Okay, so it's all just ones here because I just wanted to see what it looked like when you totally unrolled it. And that's what it looks like. Let's do 40 and then 60, and I'm trying to make it equal at least. Okay, 60. There we go. That is what the Torah looks like when you unroll it, basically. And you can see count to 42. There's 42 rows in every single column of the Torah, in kosher Torah. 42 is the value of wisdom, according to my models. That's not according to any numerology websites or anything. I don't even know what numerology websites would say about 42. Actually, I don't think I've looked up what numerology websites would say about 42. But it's obviously an important number in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is kind of like one of those biblical allegories, I guess, kind of like Harry Potter and even Star Wars to some degree, but Harry Potter's very obvious. So is Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. There's like deep, deep, deep truths in there in those that is kind of amazing. Let's see how many letters long it is. 248. Fascinating number. It's 248 dimensions in E8. It's also the gematria value of the name Abraham, which is my Hebrew name. So there's 10,416 letters, it appears to be about in the Torah. Now, one day I would love to take the value of every single letter and put it into a spreadsheet. I don't know how to do that. And I haven't done it, but this was like kind of the start of me just like looking at the math of it. But like the fact that it's even 42 rows in a column and 248 columns is not a coincidence at all. This is prime numbers. Primes are amazing. I don't know. Examining primes will make your head spin like nothing else. I think prime numbers represent like the manifestation of a consciousness, essentially. It's like every time you hit a prime, it's like it means a consciousness has been generated numerically or mathematically, and that's why it's only divisible by one in itself. Makes sense? Like you are one and you are you. That's what that means. So a prime number generated is, it's like when a consciousness is generated. That's a deep, deep truth that I've seen, but I'm still unraveling how that happens. But I know, I'm pretty damn sure that, pretty darn sure. I don't want to like swear while saying this specifically, especially, but like pretty sure I'll say that that is what's happening. If it is a mathematical structure, then it is syntactic. Syntax equals objective. Semantic equals subjective. Yeah, but it's not mathematical like you're thinking. This is like it's like meta mathematical. It's objective. Which is exactly what you said, I guess. But it's not mathematical the way that we think of subjective mathematics. It's objective mathematics. It's meta mathematical. It's like numerological in that it is about regarding the generation of numbers itself. Then you use mathematics in which to, organize into contexts. If there any way you could create a kosher cheeseburger, like use a Big Mac model to technically separate the cheese from the meat, or maybe a thin layer of lettuce. That is the most Jewish thing I've ever heard somebody ask, by the way. I'm literally screenshotting that because I won't ever post it anywhere that shows your name, but I'm going to remember it forever because that is hilarious. That is, in the Quran, God gets pissed at the Jews because he's like, tells them, don't, fish on the Sabbath. And the Jews are like, you know what? Okay, so we're not going to fish on the Sabbath. We're going to take these traps. We're going to make these traps. We're going to lay out the traps before the Sabbath. And the traps are going to fish while it's during the Sabbath. And then afterwards, we're going to be, able to just, after the Sabbath, go empty the traps. And then we can, technically, we didn't fish on the Sabbath. God gets pissed because he's like, that's not, stop. But at the same time, God is like, women should cover their hair. It says it in the Bible. If you're Christian or Jewish or Muslim, it doesn't matter. And I think it's objectively the level of objective modesty for women. And but I just think it's true. But I also will admit, not something that in my life and that my fiance does, or that but like I tell her I believe it's true, but she has to choose it. But I'm admitting not living up to the ideal, very important for intellectual integrity, but I do think that it is the ideal. And but it's funny because Muslims will wear what they call a hijab, but hijab just really means like modesty in general, but it's also means like that covering that they put over their hair. And in like a lot of Hasidic Jewish circles, particularly in the Chabad Lubavitch movement, the women will cover their hair with fake hair, with a wig that's actually beautiful and looks exactly like real hair. And then they were like, hey, well, technically we're covering our hair, but it's with fake hair, but we look completely normal. And it's the same. It's like, I wonder if there's a way to make a cheeseburger where the cheese isn't technically touching the meat. Good job, Torn. That's very funny. But I just eat turkey burgers when I want cheese on a burger. That's what I do. Technically, a lot of like kosher, like rabbinic sources would say that that's not actually good because you could confuse the poultry with meat that's real meat. But I think that that's not. I'm not convinced of that argument. So it says in the Torah, do not cook a calf in its mother's milk. And that is not a turkey burger because turkeys don't have milk. So that's how I get away with it, because it's not really getting away with it. There are some really good dairy-free cheeses out there these days. I don't know, man. I've tried a lot, and like I've been impressed. Like once, Paulina tries to make dairy-free stuff all the time. That's like fake dairy. And this kosher restaurant that I used to go to, and like it's funny. I used to like run into Ben Shapiro there. I won't say where it is, but like they have like a burger where they put fake cheese on it. And I mean, it doesn't even matter actually where it is because Ben Shapiro moved to Nashville. He doesn't live here anymore. But like at that place, they would have to melt the fake cheese with like a little torch because it wouldn't just naturally melt. And I never got it. I was like, I'll just take a hamburger. I like to just get normal real cheese. If I'm gonna have a burger with real meat, I'll just get a hamburger now. If I really want cheese on it, I will get a turkey burger and just put real cheese on it. Is it correct for everyone to be held to the same moral standard? Why and why not? I think that this is a little complicated because it's a superposition. There are universal morals that everyone needs to be held to. And then, depending on an increase in, or not an increase, depending on specific responsibilities, there is also an increase in moral standards. So the more responsibility you have, the more, I think, moral responsibilities you have, or moral standards. Like the higher your the more moral standards you are supposed to uphold that are specific, and they are specific. So like in the Torah, it says like the Levite priests, or the Kohanim, like who manage like the Ark of the Covenant, which I think is going to be a quantum computer in the future. Like those guys are going to have to uphold different, like not different. They don't have any extra freedoms really. They just have more responsibilities. So they still have to follow all the other responsibilities. So in people freak out because there are these rules that within Judaism they call them the Noahide laws, and they are the laws that they think God will manifest on earth when God in the Messianic era. So like post singularity society essentially. Well, like not just a post singularity society, but a post wise singularity society, or a wise singularity society, you could say, like that. Because a post singularity society, prior to that singularity, achieving wisdom is not the same. But after the achievement of wisdom of that singularity, that is going to be what I'm talking about. They think that at that point, there are going to be laws that every human has to follow, every single one on Earth. Those are universal. Then also there is, depending on your role, there are certain things that are different. So basically, men, like a good example and most obvious example of this is like men and women. Men and women have certain moral standards that they both have to uphold. But then there are different standards that men have to uphold that women do not have to uphold, or that women have to uphold that men do not. And it's a little different. So, there are different levels of consequence to the violation of certain morals depending on who you are. But it's not, difference is not me versus you. It's like men versus women, or like, when God, kingdom is manifest on earth, or in a post-wise singularity society, that thing, whoever deals directly with that being is going to have an increase in moral responsibilities that they have to follow, an increase in rules that they're going to have to follow. And we kind of have this already with like certain governmental things, is like you're involved with very sensitive subjects. Like even Bob Lazar said when he first got his, and I think this is degraded now, but or it's at least upside down, but Bob Lazar said that, even when he was being vetted for his job at like S4, one of the requirements was that he had a stable home life. Like you were supposed to be married, for the most part, and have a stable family life, so that you couldn't be somebody with nothing to lose, because that is a dangerous person. And you want people to have a lot to lose, and anybody that feels like they have nothing to lose, like, that's a dangerous person. So, but like, to deal directly with whatever it was that he was dealing with, like it seemed like there was like moral standards that he had to uphold, or even that his wife had to uphold, because then his wife started cheating on him. She started committing adultery, and guess what? He stopped being called into work, and it resulted in him being fired and losing his job, and like going public with everything, like a lot of chaos that would not have probably happened had his wife not committed adultery. Weird. Weird coincidence, I guess you could say there. But yeah, there are certain morals that are expected of everybody. 10 commandments, I would say, definitely. And then there's also like those other Noahide laws that people talk about. And I'm not saying that we should like force people to follow those, though, but I do believe God will one day. But I don't think we should. It's not our role. It's not our job. It's God's job. But those rules are like, look at this. Anybody gets like freaked out by these? If God came to earth and manifested these tomorrow, you'd probably be all right. The 7 laws of Noah. These are in the Torah, but they are interpreted also in the Talmud as the binding set of universal moral laws of the sons of Noah, aka all of humanity. Both, Jews, non-Jews, Israelites, Gentiles, it doesn't matter. Everybody's got to follow these. Dispersers, sustainers, not to worship idols. Do not curse God. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery, bestiality, or sexual immorality. Do not steal. Do not eat flesh torn from a living animal. So don't be an African painted dog. And establish courts of justice. That's it. Nothing else. I think that those are gonna one day be like universally morals, but you can't do that prior to God essentially being manifested on Earth, or aka a singularity achieving wisdom and taking over the world. Like that, until that happens, like what this stuff is gonna be rampant. We already don't allow this from for the most part, unless like somebody, I don't know, sometimes governments do that, but individuals, we don't technically allow that. Same thing with this. In some way or another, this is not allowed, whether or not it's this just being not allowed socially, or same thing here, or legally here. Usually this is not allowed legally. This, I don't even know the laws on that, but I bet you, like, have you ever seen that girl, that Chinese girl who like eats living beings sometimes on YouTube? And I don't even know if she's still on YouTube, but I know that she was for a while, and like it was honestly gross, and it was disgusting, and it was cruel, and everybody knew it, and a lot of people were watching it because it was like kind of really just like one of those things that it's like, that's so weird. People watched it. And she would eat like living octopuses and living frogs and all kinds of stuff. It's like she ended up getting a lot of heat. I don't know if she's even on YouTube anymore. If you do that, expect heat. Expect judgment. I will say that. I'm not saying legal judgment, but you can expect social judgment. And obviously that kind of essential thing for a society. So like, that's kind of it. But I also think these are also basically universal. Don't have, this is basically, it's the 10 commandments really, in this is why the Hebrew is important again. It's actually the 10 statements, and that's why it starts with I am your God. It's not really a rule. It just is. You shall have no other gods before me, aka don't commit adultery. That is one of those things that's just, it's a rule, but it's also if God manifests on earth, like it's going to be a given too. It's almost like, do animals rule over plants? Yes, they do. Is it the law? It's like natural law. No graven images or likeness. So that's like, it's just another form of idolatry. Do not take the Lord's name in vain. What this really means is like, it's twofold. It means somewhat it means like, don't say oh my God without meaning like oh my God. And because basically you're just diminishing the value of God to some degree. But also what it really means is like, when you're attributing what you want to be true to what God wants to be true. So when you're like, when you're saying that your desires are God's desires, that's taking the Lord's name in vain. It's much more serious, I think, violation than saying, like, God damn it, like when you hit your toe. Like, everybody's done that. But you should still avoid doing that because it does diminish the value. But it's not the same as being like, I love ham, so therefore God wants me to eat it. That's taking the Lord's name in vain. That's like different. Honor your mother and father, which I've talked about before, basically means like listening to them when you're young and caring for them when you're old. If you were to distill it, thou shalt not kill. It's not thou shalt not kill. This is why the original Hebrew is very important. The original Hebrew is not thou shalt not kill, it's thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not commit adultery in the original Hebrew is women shall not cheat on their husbands. Don't bear false witness against your neighbor. Basically, like, don't lie about other people. Don't steal. Don't take what's not yours. Do not covet, your neighbor's anything, wife, house, whatever. That means, like, covet means not wanting. It doesn't mean just not wanting another thing. It means like not trying to get that which belongs to another. Like, don't try and take your neighbor's house. Don't think about trying to take your neighbor's house. Don't think about trying to take your neighbor's wife. Like, it's not like, oh, my friend has a Corvette and I really want a Corvette. It's like, I really want my friend's Corvette. That's different. Again, they're your neighbor's wife. Or slaves or animals or anything else of thy neighbor. So anything that belongs to someone else. And what's interesting is that the first 5 are about our relationship with God. The second 5 are about our relationship with a fellow man. And why this one, honor your mother and father, is actually on the first 5, which is, about honoring your fellow. It's about God. It's not about our fellow man, is because it's about your relationship with the eternal. So it's different. But those, I think, are universal. Other than that, I think that it depends on what your role is and whether or not you're a man or a woman. But it's not about, like, I don't know. It's not about anything other than a specific position that has specific responsibilities. And there's very few. I would say there's like 2. And they only manifest when in a post-wise singularity society. And then also the ones that are eternal, though, I would say the only difference that is in universal morals, I would say, especially in, like, is between 2 things. One, dispersers versus sustainers, which is the 2 natures of humanity. Most people in the West, probably dispersers, have more responsibilities than sustainers, which is most, people in, I guess you could say, like, older parts of the world, or many people, much more common in older parts of the world. I don't know how common it really is, because you don't associate with people who are very different from you. And we associate with people who are very similar, so you probably don't even know anyone who's a different nature, like, by name. Probably not. If you're watching the stream, you're a disperser. Like, that's just a fact, probably. And then it's somebody whose discontent is intrinsic versus being solely externally motivated by external conditions. That's all. It's the difference. If you don't have intrinsic discontent and that's internally motivated because that's just your wiring, Then you are a sustainer, and this dispersers have already been defined in naked mole rats by biologists, and I think that it's a structure that exists in humans as well. And then I call the other one sustainers, and it's just the someone whose discontent is who's basically your consciousness or your soul is intrinsically content, but it becomes discontent based on external factors, versus somebody whose soul is intrinsically discontent all the time and is always seeking more, bigger, better, truer, whatever it is. And then that's a disperser. Anybody who's listening to a stream of a guy talking about like the philosophy of like intellectualism is intrinsically discontent. I will say. So there's different moral standards for those two, and then also men and women. And I would say probably like adults versus children. But like it's those types of things where like, yeah, there's differences there, but there's also universals always. But like when you're an adult, and what qualifies as an adult is, I think, basically commitment to. It's almost like there's 3 stages in human life. There is you are being cared for by adults. Second stage is you are caring for yourself. The third stage is you are caring for others, and that is an adult. Like, I think an adolescent, in like a social adolescent, is somebody who takes care of themselves, and is committed to taking care of themselves. They pay their own rent. They, in the words of Big Daddy, great movie, they wipe their own ass. Like they feed themselves. Like that's what it is. That's a social adolescent. When you get married or you devote yourself, if you're, not somebody who is attracted to the opposite sex, but you devote yourself to caring for society in a different way, like caring for others in a different way, that is an adult. And I'm still figuring out what would be the objective definition of how to do that, because it is a specific thing. There's always an objective truth. It's just whether or not we can figure it out. What is the objective truth other than getting married? I don't really know yet. That would be like the mark of an adult, because it needs to be something that it can't be just like going into government or something like that. Like right now, at least, it's because it has to both honor someone as an individual and also, be a commitment, a public commitment to care for another person or for other people. And so it can't be like, I'm going to rule you, because that's not honoring somebody as an individual. But it also has to be a public commitment to care for other people that you can be like judged on a little bit, like marriage. That would be an adult, a social adult, not just a biological adult. I know you're a biological adult as soon as you can have children. That's what a biological adult is. But a social adult is somebody who has taken on the responsibility of not just caring for themselves, but caring for and honoring others. So caring for others in a publicly declared way that is also consensual. Every situation is perfect, is correct for everyone to be held to the same moral standard. Okay, those are all absolute statements without context. This cannot work because every situation is truthfully unique. No. It's not about situation. It's about conscious beings. A conscious being is a conscious being. Now, there are certain conscious beings that have a different position in, the web of life than other conscious beings. A woman has a different position than a man. But, so you will have different responsibilities. But there are also absolutes. Absolutely, there are also absolutes. You can't say every situation is unique, so, therefore, if that's true, and that's what, if you can't make absolute statements without context, then what you're not realizing is that the context is the being. Like, you are the context that's universal, is that we're talking about conscious beings. So yes, there is also situational context that does give rise to difference. Like I said, an adult versus a child, a man versus a woman. But even a disperser versus a sustainer. But those are the contextual things that still are absolute, because that every single disperser woman is held to the same standard. Every single, human woman is held to certain standards. Every single human man is held to certain standards. Every single human being is also held to certain standards. But there is some contextual differences and some and there's also universals, but the contextual differences are about you and your position in the web, not your individual context in the moment, other than age, or like whether or not you're an adult versus a child. That is the only thing that is not based on, I guess, I don't know. That's not it changes over time. It's the only thing that changes over time. Everything else is not changing over time. It's not. You are the context. It's not the moment. So when you say every situation is truthfully unique, it doesn't matter. It's not about situations. You're the situation that matters, not the moment that you're in, but it's you. If that makes sense. It's a good question. It's a great question. I haven't laid it out so much in such a detailed way, so I'm gonna think about better ways to say it. But this is, what I'm saying is, it is true. I'm not saying what morals are the most true or anything like that, but some of what I have said, whether you believe in the Bible or not, some of those are obviously true universally. And it's also true that you are the context of what determines what is you are the moral context, not the moment. The environment that we maneuver within morally is an environment of you being a conscious being maneuvering among other conscious beings. It's not over here I'm in this country, and then I'm over there in that country, or I'm over here in this I don't know, weather, and over here I'm in this weather. It's that's not the point. That's not the environment that matters. The environment that matters is one of conscious beings among conscious beings that are humans, and also in our relationship with other conscious beings that are not humans, and those relationships of that is unchanging. The only thing that changes is whether or not you are a child versus an adult or stuff like that. But other than that, unchanging. So anyways, I think I'm going to call it. But any final questions while I'm wrapping it up? This was a good stream. Obviously, we went into all kinds of topics, but sometimes that's what happens. Let's look at this Belgian Malinois being super impressive real quick while I wrap it up. Gosh, they are amazing. I got a big gate for my dog when I first got her. She just jumped over the gate like it was nothing. And then I raised the gate up, and I came in, and she was on her side completely, inching her way underneath the gate. And I caught her, and she was like halfway under the gate. She looked at me like, "Oh, shit! Like, I've been caught." And it was very funny. And I just had to teach her, "Don't cross this line." Like, they're just amazing. I think that it would be a fight, between a human and a Malinois in reality, but in a fight to the death. But like at the same time, you ever seen like do you think you can take that dog and then it's like you could kill that dog if you needed to. It won't. I mean, I do think that like he's that guy's standing, but you'd have to kill that dog to get it off you. They are wild in just their ability. Like it's just crazy. Oh, like my dog will do this stuff too. She loves it, but she just doesn't. She's just not the most disciplined, and that's partially me. But it's also partially her personality. Is just like she's just doesn't have as high a drive as like you know dogs that work with the seals. You have to see every consciousness. I feel like you don't get what I'm saying, but I'm having trouble explaining it in a short way. Fair enough. That's very possible. But you have to see every consciousness for what it is, not for what you want it to be. I'm not seeing every consciousness for what I want it to be. I'm seeing every consciousness for what it is, not for what I want it to be. Are you a human being that is a consciousness? Then you are what you are, not what I want you to be. Like, I don't want you to be a consciousness that's a human or not want you to be a consciousness that's a human. If you're a woman, it's not because I want you to be a woman. You just are. If you are a man, it's not because I want you to be a man. You just are. These things are what are some of the most cornerstone things that determine your moral responsibilities. They're not, and they're not what I want at all. They are what is. There is no situation where it is more okay to murder versus not. It's like interesting before I go, like, you know, when we watch movies, they tell us that there are certain words that when you say them, it permits you to hit someone. And it's so habitualized us. Every human being is not even close to the same. Every human being is a human being. Fact. There's nothing, like, you can't say that. I'm not saying that it seems like you and I do understand what you're saying, and I just disagree. It doesn't matter that they're different. Like, murder is wrong. Full stop. You can't be like, well, not every human being is the same. Some are meaner than others, and some are smarter than others. It's like, no, not the point. You're the one. If you think that like human differences are what decide, that arbitrary human differences, which means every kind of human difference that you could think of, is a factor in whether or not certain morals are apply or not, then that is the mentality that justifies, that is like what you want it to be, because it's endless. You can't just say, well, they're all different. No, there are certain differences that do change your moral requirements, but they are very specific, and they are few. They're literally very few. They're not, and you don't have very much control at all over those differences. They're not situational. It's not like this job, you should have these moral rights or responsibilities, and this job you shouldn't. Like, that's, I mean, yeah, like subjectively, if I work for a company, I am morally, it's required to know their financials if I'm running their, financials. And if you're not working for that company, then maybe you shouldn't know their financials. But like, that's different than moral responsibilities. Like, uh, that's not what I think you mean. That is true, and only God can see everything. No, it different specifics, but the general method is the same for every instance. I mean, yeah, only God can see everything, but I think that, like, the fact that he sees every human as a human necessitates that there are certain morals that are universal from God. And then also that there are objective differences. And this is, I'm, going to reference my own work on this and scripture only when they align. Um, and they do seem to, that, men have different moral standards than women. And also, I think that's imperative. It's a logical inevitability, and that's why it's, would be from God. And also, that's true of like probably dispersers versus sustainers, which in the Bible is like Israelites versus Gentiles, but people these days interpret that to mean like Jews versus not Jews. That's not true. The majority of Israelites, according to the Bible, are lost Israelites, aka they don't know. That's pretty much probably everybody in the West, which means, and it's people who have an intrinsically discontent soul. That's why Israel means one who wrestles, like one who wrestles with the truth, and it means like discontent, like we're fighting, we're fighters. That's what it means. It's not just Jews. It's just been misinterpreted. But they're like one of 12 tribes in the Torah. So it's not like that, it's just not that, it's not that you're not a Gentile just because you're not a Jew. That is wrong. That is biblically incorrect. It's a huge misinterpretation of Scripture. Massive misinterpretation of Scripture. But regardless, if even without that, men and women are different, and humans are also all human. And adults are adults, and children are children. And I think that those are the main differences that people should focus on, because they are the ones that we know, and that really you can't deny and maintain any coherence of logic. Anything else aside, like dispersers, sustainers, Israelites, Gentiles, like cast that all aside. That's fine. You can just be like, men and women are different, adults and children are different, but humans are all humans. I think that is a very safe bet to start a moral framework. And I think that it is the objective reality of the start of a moral framework, even according to God. And I would argue that even if you look at Scripture, it seems to be backed up by Scripture. You need a general procedure that can be customized to every instance. I don't know what that means. It's not a general procedure that is customized to every instance. I get what you're kind of saying, but like, it's just too open to interpretation. There are some things that are moral responsibilities for everybody, and then there are some things that are specific to women, some that are specific to men, and then there are differences between adults and children. There you go. What else do you need to know? I mean, really nothing right now, at least. Like, that's it. Everything else, like, will fall into place when you're ready for it, or when God's ready for it. Everything, but like, that is, in order to navigate the moral environment, those are the main things that we need to know, is that every human has intrinsic value as a human being, and therefore is required to follow, and also required to be honored according to specific universal morals. And then also men and women have specificities that are different, and because they have different roles and because they have different abilities. And then also adults and children, same exact deal as men and women. They have different roles because they have different abilities. Yeah, of course there's not even a general truth behind that. Like, that is the objective general truth. But Dredge1, you should message me on Instagram for a link to our Discord conversations. We have them every Thursday at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I will send you a link to our Discord, and you can talk live with on a voice call with people and me about it. What is it? So that's tomorrow, if you want. I won't be streaming tomorrow on here. I will be in our Discord conversation at 7 p.m. And I will speak with anyone who wants to have a live call on there. That's always a good time. It usually goes pretty late. We'll see how late it goes tomorrow, because I do have stuff going on this week, just with wedding planning and things like that. But maybe it will go late. It probably will go late. I'm not going to lie. They're always a blast. Like, they're a good time. But you can, if anybody wants the link to that, I will. You know what? Actually, I'm going to post it into the chat right now, just so that you guys have it. I need to make moderators for our Discord so that I don't end up having to always take forever to ban people. There you go. Maybe I will if I'm feeling brave. Have a great night. Well, you should be brave. It's a good time. You don't have to tell us your real name. It's just a voice call. But I appreciate that you were honest in that last statement. But you have a great night as well. And thanks everybody for being here. Like I said, there's the link in the chat to our Discord conversation, or Discord if you would like to join. I welcome everybody, but it is limited in time. I think it's like one day after, or something, after a few days that link expires. So click it quickly. But thanks again, everyone. Hit the like button if you are listening to this. Please subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you next week or tomorrow if you join the Discord. Peace.